Welcome one and all, it's time for yet another Warhammer Age of Sigmar tournament report. Stormcast Eternals back in action, but with a drastically different list to the kind that you'd usually see me running. So, let's have a look. So this event is March of the Regiments, which took place at the TSN Arena, 16 players, standard 2,000 points, and immediately you'll see this is totally different from any Stormcast Eternals list I've ever run at a tournament before. Some units that I've never even used in a game before, let alone a tournament. So, I suppose we should go through it, shouldn't we, and go through my thoughts on creating this list as well. So, Krondys, I don't remember exactly when this guy was released, but it must be a couple of years ago now. So this was sitting on my shelf, staring at me, primed mostly, and it was giving me this accusing gaze for all those months. And finally I decided, you know what, this thing is not going to take long to paint at all. It doesn't actually have, if you look at it compared to the Stardrake's very busy. Krondys does not have as much going on at all. It's mostly scales and wing membrane, which if you get the right combo of dry brushing and washes, you can do that very, very quickly. So that's what I did. Got it blasted out from the painting table, got it done, and then thought, I should probably take this to a tournament now to justify the expense on this model, first of all. It's quite an expensive one, and getting around to finally painting it. I want to see it on the table. What's a good combo that would go with Krondys then? So I start browsing around the internet, various Discord servers and Facebook groups, seeing what kind of thing people are running, and Tempesters are one, because the one thing that lets Tempesters down with their crossbows is their rend is not that great. So with one of Krondys' spells, of course, you can reduce enemy armor saves, basically. So that seems like a good combo. And the other thing is that Krondys is a Behemoth. And if you look at the command traits available to the Stormcast Eternals, if your general is also a Behemoth, you can take Master of the Celestial Menagerie and make all of them -1 to wound in combat. So in melee, anyone hitting any of them, any of the big dragons, is going to be -1 to wound while the general is still on the table. So that's why there's a Stardrake in there. And let's just go through the list unit by unit, shall we? So we've got Krondys. Very exciting to have him on the table finally, and I've given him the spell Celestial Blades. So that's going to be a +1 to wound, because a lot of these big models, they have kind of varied attack profiles, but some of their attacks do only wound on 3s, so that's something that can come in handy just to cast on themselves. And the Stardrake is in a similar boat, some of its attacks don't wound on 2s. And he's also got his special unique spell that I think it's cast on a 9, but he starts off with +3 to cast and +4 if he's near a Stardrake as well. So it should be quite easy to get that one off, especially in this age of primal dice. And that puts one of several debuffs onto the enemy. So it's like -1 to their armor saves, -1 to their rend, -1 number of shooting attacks, and something else. But you've got all these options, but the main one that I'm eyeing up is -1 to their armor saves, because then I'm going to start shooting them with crossbows and other such things, and defend somewhat against save stacking. And he also, his tail, there does not seem to be a cap on the number of attacks that the tail has. If there is a cap, it's not featured in his war scroll, so someone let me know if there should be any kind of cap on this, because any model within 3 inches of him when he fights, all of those models will add 1 attack to the tail. So if you're surrounded by 50 models, 50 attacks. If that's wrong, someone let me know. I can reveal now that during this event I was never surrounded by 50 models, so I did not roll 50 attack dice for the tail, just in case that's illegal. And yeah, it's just pretty cool. The Stardrake. So this is the Lord Celestant on Stardrake rather than the Drakesworn Templar, and the reasons for that, I think there's 100 points between them, and What do you get for that 100 points? I think the Lord Celestant has a slightly better weapon in its hand. So the Stardrake attacks are the same, I believe, but it's really just the weapon that the Lord Celestant hits with is slightly better than the Templar. You also get an extra command point to use on a unit within 12 inches, and you also get an extra point of armour as well, which is quite a big deal for 100 points. Because if you look at it, you would probably pay... How much would you pay for a character that puts +1 armour save onto somebody? I'm thinking like the Lord Castellant, or people taking Arcane Tome purely so they can use Mystic Shield. You might take a hero purely for that ability. So I think 100 points just for +1 armour isn't the worst deal in the world. So that's why the Lord Celestant has been chosen, and I'm worried about his armour because those two models are going to be the main fighting force of the army. If you look at this, all the other units are quite small and definitely not dragon-powered. So these two are going to be doing the fighting. What upgrades have I put onto the Lord Celestant then? Being the general. So, command trait, Master of the Celestial Menagerie, so -1 to wound in close combat against both my Behemoths while the Stardrake is on the table. So, the Stardrake obviously is going to have to stay alive for Krondys to keep that benefit as well. Got the Celestine Hammer. I've given the Stardrake the Quicksilver Draft, and the reason for that is I feel like there's going to be a time when I get both of these into combat, and I want them both to be attacking at the same time before the enemy goes. So that's one way to achieve that. Got these two big monsters. I don't want to be only throwing one of them in if the opportunity is there to do both, because their damage output isn't that obscene on their own. So I would like to get both of them in. And also, this ties in a bit with the Praetors I've got down here as well. So the Praetors as a bodyguard unit, they make one of these guys much more survivable. On average, if people target the dragon rather than the Praetors, if my maths is correct, then it doubles their amount of wounds with the Praetors there, just a unit of 3. So if they are attached to the Stardrake, then that can be quite an effective roadblock somewhere as well for the enemy. And that means there's a chance that they might be charging me, which could be a good time to use Quicksilver to go first against certain armies where if they're maybe multi-charging in with something, there's one particular unit I want to try and destroy before they strike. Or, to be really scary, if it's someone like Ogres, then the Stardrake can potentially just eat them whole, because they have a number of wounds that's lower than 6, so the Stardrake can potentially just gobble them while it's on full health. So you don't want to be taking too many wounds with the Stardrake before you strike. So, I mentioned the Praetors, a bodyguard unit. If they're within 3 inches of the hero that they're bound to, then any wounds that go through the armour, on a 1 to 2, the hero just takes the wound. 3 to 4, the bodyguards take the wound. 5 and 6, ignored. So it's basically a 3-up ward save until the bodyguard are depleted. And yeah, so you obviously don't want to let the enemy wipe out the bodyguard, but even if they do target the bodyguard first, that's still a 9 wound unit there with a 3-up save, and they're using a lot of attacks to kill that they're not directing at your dragons. So there will be enemies that have the option to put themselves in a position to attack the bodyguards first, even if you're shielding them a bit. The only issue is how are they going to keep up? And I'm thinking the Stardrake is actually a good one for them to be bound to more often than not, because not only have I given it Quicksilver, so it's going to go on the front line, doesn't mind being charged, maybe, at times, but also it's got that free command point which you can use to let them keep up with you by auto-running. So that makes them almost as fast as the Stardrake. And when it charges, its base is so big that hopefully you can get a little bit of it dangling back within 3 inches of them and still be benefiting from that ward save. I'm going to be keeping an eye out for anything that switches off ward saves, obviously, because that would be terrible. We've got the Stormkeep in the chat, top-notch Stormcast Eternals content. Always good for getting some tips there. No cap on the tail. My record is 48 attacks. Nice. There was actually an army of ghouls at this event, and I didn't count them, but someone might be able to count them when we get to the picture of the armies in a bit, but I'm sure there was something like 80 or 100 ghouls in there. So I could have theoretically broken that record had I faced that army, but, spoiler alert, I did not face it. So, what else have we got on the Stardrake? So, Celestial Instincts. So, it can retreat and then still charge or shoot. And I'm thinking, because these two big dragons are really my only big, mega hard-hitting units, I don't want the Stardrake to be tied up with something it doesn't want to fight. I would like to have the option to just run away and attack something different. Especially if I'm using it as a roadblock and kind of allowing it to be charged because it's so absorbent for punishment purposes, then the enemy might not be throwing in their best stuff in there. They might just be trying to chaff it up, so I would very much like to just fly away from that and charge into something that I actually want to fight. So that's my thoughts on that. We do not have an Arcane Tome in this list, which is unusual for any list in this game, it seems. But we do have another wizard. We've got the Knight Incanter down here with the spell Merciless Blizzard. And this plan is because I can fit this army into 2 drops, because it's only Krondys that's not in Battle Regiment. Everyone else fits in there nicely. So 2 drops means quite often I'm going to be getting the choice of going first or second. So I'm generally going to be making my opponent go first. Then on turn 2, I plan to drop down the Knight Incanter out of the sky, near the enemy's biggest, scariest stuff, and then try and get the double turn. And if I do get the double turn and get a primal dice or 2, try and cast Blizzard on something. That is the plan. I'm open to changing that plan if I come up against something where I really need to shut down a particular spell in the first turn. Then she may be on the table to do that, but that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Her main purpose is that, though, the Blizzard. And where possible, I'm going to try and put her in behind enemy lines as well, away from objectives, because she has to be dealt with. Because if I don't get the double turn, that means I have got a chance for another double at some point. So they can't just leave her there unopposed, because on my turn after that, she could move into position and then try for the Blizzard again. So you have to deal with that menace, that threat, that Knight Incanter. And even if they do get the next turn after she comes in, she's still going to be able to use her auto-unbind during that turn before she gets murdered horribly. Unless she gets killed by, let's see, some kind of hero phase ability that's not a spell. I'm sure there's something out there that could do that. Then, onto the battle line. So we've got 2 units of Tempesters. I have been running them as a 4, but points are very tight in this list, so I need them both to be battle line units. Hammers of Sigmar, so not only are they battle line, but also I'm getting the nice 6+ ward save on objectives as well. So 2 small units. The issue with them being a smaller unit, of course, is that all-out attack isn't as efficient. But really, all-out attack isn't benefiting some of their attacks anyway, because the breath weapon always hits on a 4 regardless. So they're not the most optimal unit in the game to have all-out attack played on them anyway. Then we've got 5 Liberators and Corvraid, so of course they can be brought back to life assuming I've got a hero and a command point available. I already talked about the Praetors, so that just leaves the Long Strikes. So I do not have Thunderbolt Volley, so they are mostly going to be put in the sky, I think. And when they drop in, they're just providing some nice wound output. I tend to find that they usually get some mortal wounds with the shooting, even though it's only 6 shots between them. So, nice shooting output. As far as mortal wound output for the army, the Long Strike's obviously on 6s. I've got the mortal wound shooting from the Dracoths, and from Krondys has a mortal wound shooting attack as well. The Stardrake has Rend 3 on its shooting attack, the Long Strike's Rend 2 when it's not doing mortal wounds, and the ability of Krondys to reduce armor saves, so I think this is quite a powerful shooty sort of list, even though it's not massed numbers, not many models at all. So, what are the issues that I foresee with this list going in? Number 1, no teleporting of any kind. So, once my units are down on the table, that's it. They can't teleport at all. I don't have the Knight Zephyros, I don't have any of the teleporty units, I don't have the Lord Relictor, I don't have any Relictors whatsoever, so no teleporting, which means some battle tactics might be tricky. I'm also quite low on units, and some of them really are too strong to be out there hugging the edge of the board usually, to try and get battle tactics. So, Some of them might be a struggle. Some of the others, though, suddenly look much easier. For example, Draconith Destruction. That's going to be probably very easy. Any army that has a unit with 10 models, surely, with all these dragons, one of them is going to get the job done and kill them. And there's also, is it the Matter of Honor, where you kill a monster with a dragon unit as well. So that's definitely going to be doable. And the controlling, secure the battlefield, the new Stormcast one where you just have to have a unit in each table quarter. That should be doable because I've got a lot of units that want to drop down from the sky and not assault the enemy. So they're most likely to just drop down and shoot somebody, which means they're going to be more than 6 inches away from the enemy. So that one should be doable as well. Because mostly in the sky I'm going to put the Knight Incanter for the Blizzard on the double turn, Long Strikes and the 2 Tempesta units. So they want to drop down and shoot you mostly. So if they don't charge you, then I've just got a battle tactic. So that one should be easy as well. So, game 1. If anyone's got any thoughts on the list going in, by the way, and your predictions on what it's going to struggle against and what it's going to thrive against, then let me know. Got Free Guild Joe in the chat there. Good evening. So, Geomantic Pulse is the first one. And this is the one where you probably would like to have teleporting units because the areas of high scoring are shifting over the course of the game. So, in the second battle round, whoever's going second picks which side the pulse begins, and then it works its way down over the remaining turns, and you get lots of points for holding the pulse, and points for holding the objectives adjacent to the pulse as well. So you kind of want to follow the pulse down as it goes, one way or the other, over the course of the game, to score maximum. So my standard setup is going to be Liberators on the table, Frondis on the table, Stardrake on the table, and the Praetors. I've put them between the 2 dragons here, just so my opponent isn't 100% sure which one is going to be bound to them. Just in case they've got any plans in mind for putting certain units down to match up against any particular dragon, because they think it's going to be vulnerable perhaps because it doesn't have the Praetors on it. So you decide after deployment, but before the first turn. I think it's before first turn is decided is when you choose who they're bound to. Then in the sky, this is going to be the standard setup, the 2 units of Tempestas, Long Strikes, and the Knight Incanter. And I'm against the big Wah. So let's have a look at that list right here. Now, this is a combo of various different Orc armies into one. And the grand strategy for this army is Spellcasting Savant, which is to keep the Wurgog Prophet alive, who I'll point to when we get there. So the leader is a Wurgog Prophet, who is the general, has Shaman of the Chilled Lands, so knows all the lore of the Primal Frost, has a +2 to ward save, making it a 4+ ward save because of his tattoos, and knows the lore of the Savage Beast Gorkamorka's Warcry as well, which is pick an enemy unit, and that unit can only be picked to fight last at the end of the combat phase. So that could be quite annoying. So I think that's the Wurgog Prophet there with the 2 big bones in the air, isn't it? I believe it is. And they're mostly, I think, Iron Jaws units, but there are some Cruel Boys and some Bone Splitters as well, I think. So there's Gobsprak, the Mouth of Mork, which is this big flappy dude here with the very nice water effects on the base. So that thing's known as a kind of a wizard killer. So I think it's the Gobsprak rule that if it unbinds a spell, then it does wounds to the wizard. If that's incorrect, someone correct me. But I think that's right. Then there's a Swamp Caller Shaman with Potgrot, who has the Levitate spell to make a friendly unit fly, which is over there. And that also grants, I think that's the one that grants poison attacks to the Bolt Boys there. There is an Auric Megaboss. Once per battle can gain +3 damage to its weapon, which is obviously terrifying when you've got a big dragon that it might be fighting. There is an Auric War Chanter, who has, let's see, on a 3+ can heal a model for D3 wounds. Okay. Now, I believe it is the Wurgog Prophet that has the... Is it the Work of Prophet that has the mask ability? Could well be. I think it is. The ability where it's... Which one is it then? Is it this one here, the Wergog Prophet? Or that one? You know what? I lose track with all of these things. It might be this one. And when it stares at you and it does wounds to you or kills itself, one or the other. It can keep going until one of you dies, basically. So, let's see. War Chanter, Mega Boss, Swamp Caller Shaman, a Wergog Prophet. Yeah, so there's a lot of heroes there. And I'd be lying if I said I knew 100% which one was which, as usual. Then we've got 10 Auric Ard Boys. Now, I think the Ard Boys are the slightly smaller ones, the slightly weaker ones. Is that right? And then the Brutes, yeah, that sounds right. The Brutes are the bigger, nastier ones that have more wounds. So I think these ones are the Brutes. These are the Ard Boys here. And then out on that flank, we've got some more Ard Boys, I think, there. So that's the Brute unit there, I believe. And on this flank, we've got 6 Brute Ragers, who look quite scary. Or they're going to dish out some punishment. And are they the Ragers, or are they the Gore Hacks? This is too much. Gore Hackers. They might be the Gore Hackers. How am I supposed to figure this out? Well, the Manskewer Bolt Boys, we know which ones they are. That's easy enough. So there they are. They shoot, they do mortal wounds, which is obviously bad when you rely on good armor saves like Stormcast. So, a bit of a cinematic shot there over the shoulder of the Lord Celestant towards the blurry enemy. And over the over the shoulder of Krondis towards the blurry enemy as well. And I give my opponent first turn, who chooses Magical Dominance, because none of my wizards are in unbinding range, so I'm pretty much giving up Magical Dominance in every game by making my opponent go first when they've put their wizards out of unbind range. So, there's a spell that goes off quite easily, and everything just pushes up a bit. They don't want to leave too many spaces at the back, as you'd expect, and they want to keep all the heroes nice and safe around these big blobs of orcs. And onto the objective, taking an objective. There's no point taking 2 objectives in the Geomantic Pulse in the first round, because you only get a point for holding an objective, you don't get one for having 2. You only get the extra points when the pulse is actually active and starts moving its way down. So, these guys have moved up. What do I want to do in my turn then? 3 is the maximum points you can score in this round, so 3 to the enemy. And what is my plan going to be? Well, I, of course, might get a double turn. So who do I want to kill? Who is the biggest threat? The Bolt Boys are obviously a big threat for their mortal wound shooting. Because both my big dragons are -1 to wound against in combat. So I would rather be in combat, and that's where a lot of the debuffs go as well. So for example, Krondis makes an enemy unit -1 attack against him as well. So, or I think it just picks a unit and makes them -1 attack. It doesn't specifically have to be against him. So that's going to be handy in close combat against big blobs of orcs as well. So the Bolt Boys are something I want to get rid of. I could also just do with clearing out a unit of orcs. So I'm going to pick one that's most killable, and I'm going to attempt Draconith Destruction in the first turn and try and kill this unit of 10 orcs here. So that means I'm going to drop down all my Tempesters around here, shoot them to bits, and then try and charge a dragon in there as well and finish them off. That's the plan. And there you go, you can see what happened. Stardrake moved up with its bodyguard. In fact, you can see actually, one of the bodyguard is no more. That's because they did get to strike, I believe, in... It may well have been Unleash Hell, actually, from the surviving Bolt Boys at the back. But then, the Stardrake, because of its pile-in, was able to then kill all of them as well, because all the rest of the orcs were going to die with the various attacks, and a lot being peppered with all the shooting from 2 Tempester units. I'm not worried about that unit up there, because I might get the double, and if they charge the Tempesters, one of the units can Unleash Hell and might do some good damage there, and they're quite resilient, and I've got another one as backup there. I've got Krondis here as well. So ideally I would like to go next. Now, where is the Knight Incantor? She is there. So obviously, proceeding with my plan, that guy's dead. That's just the dead Praetor. The Knight Incantor has dropped in up there, near Gobsprak. So if I get the double turn, she's going to immediately try and Blizzard Gobsprak to death. And if Gobsprak for some reason isn't an option, then this unit. So that means one of these things is going to have to go back and deal with her, and not join the fight. Which is what I want. So I get the points there, 3 points maximum. Who's going to get the priority? It is the big Warg. So don't get the double, but I do get to choose where the pulse goes. So I start it over here, where most of my big stuff is. And this one is adjacent to the pulse, so this one is worth points to get onto, but the enemy are not taking this off me, because I've got all this stuff here. And that's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult just to kill the Stardrake, first of all. -1 to wound in combat, with this ward save from the bodyguards. So yeah, that's going to be very tricky. And what is my opponent going to do here? Well, I think is this the Prophet? Or is this the Wurgog something or other? Weird Knob Shaman? One or the other. It's one of them. Teleports himself. Actually, that will be a good clue. I can figure out which one did that. Because, let's see. Pick one friendly unit. Actually, it doesn't tell me anything, because if he didn't... I think that is the Shaman, though. So just teleports himself over there. Onto the objective and out of harm's way. And I put Finest Hour on the Stardrake in this turn, because I'm thinking it's going to be targeted by all this stuff. And some of it's quite powerful, so I'd rather have my armor save extra high. And I think Krondys has taken a couple of wounds there as well. So what I did in the previous turn, I think I attempted to cast a spell, which was then... Was it Unbound? I can't remember if I was close enough for that. Okay, so on to the next turn, and into this turn my opponent chose Surround and Destroy, which I am kind of surprised about. So that's why the Shaman's gone over here for this battle tactic. So these guys don't have to stay there. This unit, however, I'm kind of surprised they want to waste their time hugging the flank. I would think they want to get stuck in. And Gobsprak is going to do that as well, because he can accomplish that feat while killing the Knight Incantor. So 2 for the price of 1. Now I do redeploy my long strikes away from these guys, because the long strikes that I'd brought down, were they even featured in the last group of photos? Let's have a look. I don't know if they actually got captured at all, but they're down here somewhere, and they were joining in with the shooting at the Bolt Boys, which is also how they died. But then these guys up here come down towards the long strikes. Too far. There we go. But because I know they need to be within 6 inches of the table edge to get the battle tactic, I just redeploy away from the table edge. So now if they charge me, they'll fail their battle tactic, so they can't afford to go after me. So, there you go. Always be aware of things like that. Where is your opponent's unit going to be if it attacks you? Is that a requirement for its battle tactic? Would redeploying change that? Something to ponder. Now, obviously everyone swarms in onto the Stardrake, but it has got Finest Hour up, and it's got bodyguards, and it's barely wounded. So I'm quite confident it's going to survive the turn. It's -1 to wound in close combat as well. Gobsprak kills the Knight Incantor, but she's kind of done her job. In the games where I don't get the double turn and she doesn't get to Blizzard anybody, she has just drawn something away from the front lines and been a menace. But she's dead. So Stardrake takes a couple of wounds, the bodyguards take some more wounds, and then the Stardrake starts chomping back and murdering some of the orcs. I think the Stardrake actually just eats 2 of them before the fighting even begins. So against units like this, where they have 2 or 3 wounds, there's a really good chance you're going to eat at least a couple of them before you even do your attacks. And the war boss is in there as well, but it's going swimmingly. And at this stage I'm thinking, I still have a chance to get 2 turns in a row now. There's a unit just sitting out there, begging to be tempested to death. The Stardrake can retreat and charge, so I can flap over to this side, and let Krondys come in at this side, possibly. Krondys could also fly over there, come in from the rear. And I've got my long strike still available to shoot. which would leave me against Gobsprak and this lot mainly, if I can whittle down this middle and clear that out in the next turn. So my opponent does score 4 points for scoring on the pulse, but not the one adjacent to the pulse. So in my turn, I go for Intimidate the Invaders, so get out of my territory, which is pretty easy. You can see here that the Tempestors murderized that unit and took the pulse. And Stardrake flapped over the top, charged back in, Frondis into the front, murdering the Orcs, and then the last one was taken away from Battle Shock. And the War Boss was killed as well. So the big dragon's doing the business. However, I think the Stardrake is out of bodyguard range, which I was cool with for the purposes of this attack, because the Stardrake is safe out of the range of this unit, because they're not very fast. So Gobsprak would have to come in and put himself in harm's way, which I can live with. So the Stardrake gets an extra command point there, as you can see. I'll use these tokens as command points, so the free one the Stardrake gets each turn I just leave there. And my opponent gets first crack at the third round as well. So no doubles yet. And here we have I think it's a Wurgog Prophet, that one. And Gobsprak making their way in. And the Wurgog Prophet is actually trying to use its... I think it's that one. Or is that the War Chanter? Well, whichever one it is, I think that's the Wurgog Prophet, and no one's corrected me. So I think that's the one that stares at you and does mortal wounds to you. So that is attempted on the Stardrake, gets it up to 9 wounds, and then kills itself, thus failing the grand strategy. So you can question the logic of having a grand strategy tied to essentially a kamikaze unit that has an ability where you just can keep rolling until you or the enemy die, and if you keep taking that chance, eventually die and fail it. So Stardrake has lost quite a few wounds though. This big unit here of... These were the brute... these I think it's just regular Ardboys actually. The brutes are dead now. So regular Ardboys go into my Liberators, who haven't really come up in the game yet because they're just chilling. And Gobsprak goes into the Stardrake, who's now at half health, and kills it. So I can live with that though, because I think I'm up on resources and points at the moment. The Liberators managed to not get murdered immediately. And they're 4 points because my opponent is not scoring any of the good areas, is just scoring the one that's adjacent to the pulse here. The pulse is still there, so I've still got the juice. Into my turn, and... Oh, actually, the Liberators do get killed. At the end of combat, I think the Orcs do mortal wounds to you, so that kills off the Liberators. And I think we're into my turn as well now, and Krondis goes into Gobsprak. And I choose Matter of Honor, kill a monster with a Draconith or Stardrake, because I think that's quite doable here. I think Krondis can definitely kill Gobsprak. And... no. So Gobsprak does not die. I think he's alive on 1 wound. Freegill Joe says the official Wurgog Prophet model has a mask on. Maybe that's what's confusing me, because that was the Wurgog Prophet that got killed. And... yeah, so I failed to kill Gobsprak. Down to his last wound, and now... well, you can see everything else has been mopped up. The long strikes are making their way back into the action. I'm going to start shooting these Orcs up in a minute, but there's not much left on the Orc side, especially if Gobsprak goes down with his final wound. But my opponent does get first crack at the 4th round. Let's see, the Stormkeep. Looks like your Tempestors weren't able to get in range to soften up Gobsprak, one of the downsides of not bringing a Lord Relic to taxi the Tempestors around. That is true. And the Tempestors were used in this game to clear out some of the other units that I thought were dangerous as well. Because Gobsprak was tied up chasing down the Knight Incanter. So Tempestors, not the longest range, but they do have good movement. So they can get back into the action. The long strike's much slower, but very long range. So they're units that can get back into the action, but obviously it's easier when you've got some kind of teleportation ability. Turn 4 for the Oryx War Clans. Big Warg. And yeah, so still no double turn. My opponent goes for Intimidate the Invaders. And Gobsprak flies away. So I put Finest Hour on Krondys, thinking that these Ard boys are going to steam in there. And you can see when the Liberators died, I brought a fresh unit back over there. And 2 of them got killed already. From some kind of magic spell, no doubt. And my opponent does Intimidate the Invaders and holds lots of points. But not the maximum, because it doesn't hold the pulse, which is hit. The pulse is there, but doesn't hold this adjacent to the pulse objective, which I still have. So 7 would be the maximum points in these mid-rounds. So, my next turn, this looks fairly easy. Gobsprak only has 1 wound left, I think. So I'll be able to kill him, which means I go for Reprisal. So Gobsprak's the one that killed my general, the Stardrake. So Krondys is just going to try and do 1 wound to him. And I've got long strikes ready to start blasting as well. And what's that? Everything's dead? Yes. So Krondys, I believe I used an Arcane Bolt and just went into combat with Gobsprak and just killed him immediately because of that. The Tempestors came up, blasted away at the Orcs, and then Krondys murdered the rest of them in combat as well. So a nice number of tail attacks probably there. So there we go. Holding all the objectives. And what is 6 the maximum? Let's see. So you've got the battle tactic for 2, holding an objective for 3, holding the pulse for another 2, which is 5, and then each one adjacent to the pulse is 1 each, I think. So yeah, that would be 7. So 7 is the maximum, which it looks like I should have. Oh, I see what it is. It's because I didn't have either of these 2, and Krondys can't take both of them, so I just picked the pulse. So that makes sense. And then surround and destroy the next round. There might be a couple of Orc characters left. I'm not sure who's alive and who's dead in this photo because there's dead piles up there. There might be a wizard left somewhere. So I get first crack at round 5 and do surround and destroy, which is a nice easy one. Long strikes, Liberators, Frondy, who we determine his base is just sufficiently sized so that this can be done. It's close, so I don't know if his base is actually dead on 6 inches or whether it's not feasible to actually do this battle tactic with him, which would seem like a really odd choice for a base size. But we did it anyway. Stormkeep Krondys' base is greater than 6 inches, you say? Well, in that case, I would not have chosen that battle tactic. Or I would have... Let's see, did I have any other units to do it with? It appeared to be like dead on 6 inches, so it seemed doable, but we didn't have a microscope and scientific measuring equipment. So I'll keep that in mind for the future. That's a very odd choice for a round base that's greater than 6 inches, when there's a battle tactic requiring you to be wholly within 6 inches of the table edge, so you just physically won't fit. Is there anything else in the game with a base that size? The Mega Gargant one's smaller than that, isn't it? That's very weird then. So I would have had to do a different battle tactic there. Okay, ending the game, murdering everything, and getting loads of points, getting my grand strategy, which if I didn't mention is Overshadow, which keeps my battle line from my starting army alive and kills the enemy battle line. So obviously I've got loads left. Okay, good win. That goes down in the tournament as a 15-5 with the total scores. There you go. So it's on the old 20 system, but the table is decided purely by wins and losses, and then it goes down to differential after that. So 15-5 win on the old 20 system, and into round 2. And have you've been eyeing up the official Stormkeep dice there? Where was there a shot of them? You can see a couple of them down there, can't you? Yeah, so my dice of choice at the moment, the official Stormkeep dice, which are very nice, of course, and gold, one of my favourite colours on a dice, black and gold in particular, and the purple Spiteful 16 dice, which is a friendly mixed doubles yearly event that I've been attending, and there are some nice dice given away there. And I actually finished first at last year's Spiteful 16, which I believe has earned me the right to choose the colour of this year's Spiteful 16 special dice, so they should be orange. So those are my two dice of choice for Stormcast at the moment, and I use the Caradron Overlord dice as primal dice, and wound dice for low wound models as well. Okay, moving on to Spring the Trap. So it's almost the most pointless battle plan there is, because nobody ever used the special feature of it. No one uses it. The only time I've seen it used was with Scarbrand, so he could charge 3d6 from reserve. Nobody else seems to use it. So, if anyone's got experience of actually playing Outflank on Spring the Trap, then let me know. So how it works is, after deployment, you can then remove D3 units from the battlefield, and then put them in reserve and bring them on from turn 2. Yeah, starting from the second battle round, at the end of your movement phase you can bring them in. So it just doesn't seem very good, because so many armies want to castle up around some kind of aura or synergy, and like armies like Stormcast just keep things in the sky and have the luxury of bringing them down in turn 1. So you don't want to be forced to wait until turn 2 to bring something in from a specific area, you just want to put it wherever you want in turn 1 onwards. So I don't know which armies really like this mission. Maybe there are some, but like I said, anyone that's got a 3d6 charge coming in from reserve is always scary. But there aren't that many of those. So apart from that, I think it's just standard scoring, this one. So let's see what I'm up against in this round. Just pulling this up on the app here. So I've gone for the same setup on the table. Stardrake, Krondys, and the Praetors, Liberators, who are staying back a bit. And up in the sky, the usual suspects there: Tempesters, Incanter, Longstrikes, and Slaves to Darkness. Now, there are some units in here that I'm familiar with, some that I'm not as familiar with. So, let's have a look here. It's the Legion of the Kabbalists. The grand strategy is to roll 11 or 12 on Eye of the Gods. So, just make Eye of the Gods rolls and get an 11 or 12. Doesn't seem that difficult. There's not too much I can do about it, really. And let's see. So the leaders, there's a Chaos Lord on Karkadrak, which is back there, I think, who has command trait Death Dealer, fight twice, once per game, and has an artifact, the Conqueror's Crown, which is 1 and 2 wound models can't contest objectives, but I don't have a lot of those. It's the Mark of Slaanesh, and the Law of Primal Frost, Merciless Blizzard, which is apparently on the Chaos Lord on Karkadrak. Okay. There is a Chaos Sorcerer Lord with Chaotic Conduit, which gets you a roll on Eye of the Gods, which is obviously grand strategy, and Hoarfrost as well. There's another Chaos Sorcerer Lord with Mark of Slaanesh and Demonic Speed, which is 3d6 charge for mounted units, and Hoarfrost as well. So the Sorcerers are amongst that rabble somewhere. Then Battle Line, so the ones I want to kill for my grand strategy, there are 5 Chaos Knights up there, 9 Untamed Beasts, and another 9 Untamed Beasts. So I think these are the Warcry warbands. There's one there, and one out there. So unfortunately 9 models, which means I can't do Draconith Destruction against them, which is terrible, because they would have been a perfect target because they're so measly and crummy, 80 points. So they'd be perfect for Tempesters to drop down and shoot to death and get a battle tactic, but alas. Then we've got 10 Chaos Chosen, which is a 460 point unit, so that's not to be sniffed at all, right in the middle there. And they have the Mark of Slaanesh and Banner of the Screaming Flesh, so +1 attack on the charge. Then there are 2 units of 6 Ogroid Theridons, 300 points each. And these guys, they're not totally tough and survivable. They don't have a very good save, but they do hit very hard. Then there are 6 Furies, which are there, just flying annoyance unit. There's also the Geminid's Endless Spell available to this army as well. It's 2,000 points, which means I will get a triumph in this game, because I'm 1980, I think. Or am I? I went through a few variations of this list, so let's double check. Yeah, 1980. So, I'll bring up the Slaves to Darkness list again, as I'm heading into the game. So, it's... I think... Is this one the same number of drops as me? I think it may well be, but I did win the roll and chose to put one of my drops down first, so I'm going to be choosing who goes first, and I make my opponent go first. Because I want that double. And you can see there's a serious bunker going on here with all the heroes inside. They do not want any of my units to teleport down in range to shoot any of those heroes, it seems. So, let's see what plan my opponent has cooked up. My opponent does not put any units in reserve to come on from turn 2 either, because that would limit the effectiveness of this bunker of doom, which is going to be very tough. So, they spread out, and you can see they're still making sure that the heroes are not vulnerable in the middle. And score 5 points. There you go. Easy start. Do surround and destroy immediately with these crummy units out on the flank. And keep one of the heroes back for this flank, for this edge as well. So what am I going to do in my turn? So obviously I'm going to be trying for the double. So if I can't find anywhere good to put the Knight Incantor, I would just leave her in reserve and try and do it later. I am going to pick a unit and try and destroy it. Or maybe 2 units. So I would pick this unit here of Ogroid Theridons and try and demolish them. And possibly try and kill Chaos Knights, or maybe one of these units out on the flank to get the Tempesters down and murdering something. So, let's see. I go for Intimidate the Invaders because everyone's about to be out my territory instantly. And the Tempesters all come down over here. Now, the reason I've brought them over here is because if I get the next turn, the double, they're in range to move up and start blasting. And they already destroy the... What are they even called? They're so puny. I can't even remember. Untamed Beasts, so they're all dead. And if I get the next turn, I'm in a good position to move up and blast away at these guys. If I don't get the next turn, I'm far enough away so that the enemy aren't guaranteed to be able to reach me. So I can live with this kind of distance. And the Stardrake did steam into these ones with the bodyguard. And did some killing. Not a huge amount though, but is well in there. Getting things done. The long strikes are down here as well, blasting away. And I decided to go big. Go for that double. So Stardrake's taken some wounds, lost a bodyguard, but not much to worry about. Krondys behind as backup has been throwing out spells. I may have put -1 to the save on these guys. And yeah, so I've got everything on the table. Apart from, is the Knight Incantor down? Did I put her up there? And I was thinking about putting her up there to threaten the Chaos Knights. But she's not visible in the photo, so we'll find out in a minute. And I do not get the double, so let's see what my opponent does with the turn. Lovely shot of the Stardrake surrounded by Ogroid Theridons there. And these guys actually make some surprisingly good distance to get up to me. I can't remember what kind of trick they had to do this, but they ended up covering quite a lot of ground there. I'm not sure whether it was a run and charge ability or an extra large move ability or some kind of extra move shenanigans. Yeah, the Knight Incantor did come down. So she was threatening the Chaos Knights with Blizzard if I got the turn. And obviously they're going to have to deal with her. So the Untamed Beasts over there move on to the objective to take it away from Krondys. The Knights and the Chaos Lord go after the Knight Incantor, which might be overkill. And the Theridons, unfortunately, do get in and murder the Long Strikes and the Tempesters. Despite a bit of Unleash Hell doing some damage. So yeah, I thought they were fairly safe at that distance, but I underestimated the potential speed of these guys. So yeah, that's a big deal. Lost 2 of my decent hard-hitting shooting units there. Stardrake's still doing fine, despite the Chaos Chosen being in there, because I think I managed to eat at least two of the Chosen before combat even started, so it's definitely not lost yet. Incanter does go down, and the Stardrake has lost some more wounds, but it's still kicking. Onto my turn, I go for Magical Dominance, just going to cast a spell and not have it unbound. The Stardrake, because he's lost all his bodyguard and he's lost loads of wounds, I decide to fly away from combat, because I may have a double coming up. I fly away, and then I think I charge him into the untamed beasts over here and kill them, because he can retreat and charge this Stardrake of mine. Krondys goes after the Chaos Knights and does some good damage to them, but doesn't kill them off. And my Tempesters make their way up this way. And they're really getting away from these guys, the Theridons, because I don't want to be fighting them really. I want to be just shooting everything else. So that's the situation as is. Still got my dragons up, and I'm hoping for the double turn now. There's a lot of death on the two objectives that I need to be taking back. So, scored some points there, but not on the objectives. I do get the double though, so I go for Surround and Destroy, because the Stardrake's already in position for it. And rather than charging into just this big wall of meat and die, I decide the Stardrake can spend the turn going to score Surround and Destroy and Heroic Recovery to get some more wounds back before it has to fight again, and I can still shoot. And Krondys can do the fighting, and the Tempesters can claim this table edge and still be shooting things. So that's my thinking. Scoring some points and doing some shooting. So the Chaos Knights all get killed by Krondy. Tempesters do some shooting. And there you go, score a few points, but it's a struggle because I'm running out of units that can actually do damage now. It was an issue losing those two here. So whether it was a mistake or just not knowing the Ogroid Theridon's movement potential. So, let's see, had I not taken this turn, what would have happened? Stardrake would have been charged, probably, and... would they have been fast enough? Chaos Lord definitely would have been, and then probably would have done enough wounds to kill it. So yeah, I don't think leaving it here was an option, because I think the Tempesters probably would have been targeted with some spells, and yeah, if I hadn't taken the turn, I think I may well have lost more stuff. But if anyone's got any other opinions on that, let me know. Into my opponent's turn, the Ogroid Theridons chasing the Liberators, who aren't eager to engage in a fight with them. And the Furies get behind the Tempesters, so I can't redeploy away from anything else that's chasing them, and the Chosen then come over this way. Ogroid's just hanging out in the middle. Ogroid's into the Liberators. Now, what I was thinking was that anytime the Liberators die, of course, you're looking at places where you can bring them back with call for aid, preferably on an objective to steal it from the enemy, or into a place they don't want them to be, but that's not really an option at the moment. So I just have to bring them back over here when they die. And I'm falling behind a bit on the score. My opponent's already got the grand strategy from rolling an 11 or 12 on the Eye of the Gods table, so there's nothing I could really do about that. And my opponent goes first in round 4, so a double turn for the Slaves to Darkness, and goes for Intimidate the Invaders, which is generally an auto-complete from being outside your own territory. Everyone surrounding the Tempesters, going to murder them. And Krondy is being measured there, you can see. Staying out of 9, so I can't redeploy. And yeah, the Slaves to Darkness just look quite comfortable at the moment. On all the objectives, killed the Tempesters, and just solidly scoring throughout the game. So I don't really see a way back, but what am I going to try? Well, let's see, who was in the middle? The Ogroid Theridons were. Krondys steams in there, and I think I've killed them all, so that's good. But can't stop my opponent scoring further for the rest of the game, and I can't rack up enough points. Magical Mayhem, try and kill an enemy with a magic spell. Tried to kill this little wizard with a spell, with a bit of Arcane Bolt, but only rolled a 1 instead of a 2 or something along those lines. And yeah, so my big dragons are still alive. And if this game just continued until somebody had lost all their models, then I would reasonably like my chances, because the dragons are still up and they can obviously flap around very fast, but within the confines of the game, I just couldn't keep them off the objectives well enough. The Star Drake became vulnerable and it had to run away. And should I be regretting that course of action? So let's zoom back a bit to when the Star Drake was still in combat, almost dead. Because I was thinking running away was the only option here. Let's see. It's really tricky because this is a very narrow area. I don't really have a good spot to fly over them and land because it's so wounded. It's not fast enough to get here, 3 inches away from the enemy, and then charge back in. And I don't know whether there's enough space for the Star Drake and Krondys to hit what they want to hit through this narrow gap between the pieces of terrain. And they're not going to kill everything here, so something's going to be able to hit and kill the Star Drake. So I think it would have died had it stayed there. And if I brought Krondys in, that leaves the Chaos Knights alone, who are obviously much better when they're charging. It leaves these guys on an objective. So it just seemed... it was really this that did it. The Long Strikes and the Tempesters getting killed by them, who seem like a very, very powerful unit, it has to be said. So, a loss to the Slaves of Darkness. Moving on to the next round. So let's have a look what the differential score was for that. So that goes down as a 15-5 loss. Into round 3, which is Lines of Communication. So the gimmick for this battle plan is that you can disrupt your opponent's phases. So whoever goes second picks a phase, and whenever their opponent tries to issue a command, there is a chance that it is... So I've got a nice glare on the book here, haven't I, for the photo? But there's a chance, I think, that it'll cost 2 command points in this one instead of 1. Because it's the lines of communication disrupted, or there's a chance that the command won't go. It's one of those things. And so we've got 3 objectives again. I'm going to go with the same setup on the table, same 4 units in the sky. This game I'm up against, let's have a look. It is the Sons of Behemat. So let's pull that list up now. This is King Brod's Stomp. It's obviously nice Jason and the Argonauts, and nice themed army. Very nice, in fact. So, we've got King Brod, obviously, who's in there, and King Brod, I think, is this one, this gigantic mace-wielding giant. And then we've got a Kraken Eater, which is this one here with the Kraken tentacles on the base, which is a good way of showing you which one's which. And that one, let's see, what does that one have? Oh, here we go. That one has a Nullstone adornment, the Nullstone icon, so you can unbind with it. There is this one here, another Mega Gargant, which is a Gatebreaker, and that one's the General, and it has a lucky shiny hat, which I think is the ward save against mortal wounds. So King Brod has a ward save if he's got another Gargant within range of him, and this one has a ward save against mortal wounds. So, the Kraken Eater is obviously the most vulnerable one. So if I have to bring down one, that's one to start with. The Gatebreaker is not one you want to chip away at, because even when you knock it down the brackets, its big 50-50 chance attack doesn't get any worse. So you have to kill it, or just leave it alone, I would say. The other two are the ones where you can chip them down. They don't get massively weak when they get chipped down Gargants, but more so attack-wise than the Gatebreaker, which is there. And then there are 3 mini Gargants, the Man Crushers. And this list is actually 1890 points, which is 110 points below the threshold. So you wouldn't normally see a list like that, but with Gargants it is somewhat understandable because you've got very specific, massive point values in play. So if there's a certain combo you want to go with, you're going to be left with an unusual amount of points, and you can end up with that kind of thing. And if you're not taking any wizards, then obviously no endless spells, so you can't make up those last few points. I think almost everything is battle line though. So, my opponent is being forced by me to go first, as you'd expect, and is going to move up onto the objectives. So the Kraken Eater is the one that can kick the objectives with the tentacles on its base, and the mini Gargants are just hugging the flanks for surround and destroy. So that is scored, and then my first turn I go for Magical Dominance, try and cast a spell, and I bring some Tempestors in, and I decide, you know what, I might have a double. I'm going to use the Tempestors in this first turn to just shoot at the mini Gargants and then charge them and try and kill the 2 minis on the flanks immediately. Just stop them being an issue and get everything else in position to go after the Kraken Eater. So the Knight Incanter has come down between the Kraken Eater and the Gatebreaker, threatening them with Blizzard. The Long Strikes have come down up there as well and start blasting. Far enough away so that anyone attacking the Knight Incanter won't be able to just pile into them as well. And the Tempestors on this side do kill off the other mini Gargant, which is nice. That's the role that they were given. Everyone else, I decided they were outside of charge range, so I decided to move up Stardrake and the Bodyguard with the intent of chasing after the Kraken Eater if I get the double. And if I don't get the double, the Stardrake is the one that's in the most danger, and it's got bodyguards, so it's more resistant to the attack of the enemy, and Krondys is just lurking back a bit, Liberator's just tagging an objective. So, will I get the double? You can see here that I failed Magical Dominance, by the way, because even though I rolled a spell nicely, it was unbound with an obscenely high roll with Primal Dice. So, wow, even though I have all those bonuses to casting and Primal Dice thrown in. But I did get the -1 to hit spell off on King Brod, just in case he decides he wants to get stuck into anybody. -1 to hit on a Mega Gargant is just horrible for them to deal with. And there we go, it's only 1 point, so that's going to be an uphill struggle from there. Let's see who gets the next go. My opponent is going second, is going in first in the second round, which is very unfortunate, but -hour on the Stardrake because it's probably going to be attacked, want to keep it alive. King Brod moves up to tag an objective, and his battle tactic is to kill those Liberators or kill them because they're on an objective. Or take an objective off me that I'm controlling. So I don't know if the Liberators actually have to die. So those 2 Mega Gargants go and take that. And this is not very aggressive from Gargants, but it has been said that a good way to play the Mega Gargants is to not be aggressive and just sit on objectives and let the enemy come at you. The Mini Gargant runs away from the Tempestors, and they then redeploy away from the Kraken Eater, and it might not be able to fit down that gap. The Knight Incanter is obviously being chased by the Kraken Eater though, and she then gets eaten by it. So my opponent scores big again, but I've still got a chance for another double, and I didn't get attacked with anything. My opponent decided that attacking the Stardrake with Finest Hour was a waste of time, and just didn't bother. So I go for Secure the Battlefield, which is going to be easy, just have a unit in each quarter 6 inches away from the enemy. So the Tempestors are going to satisfy that by killing the Mini Gargant, and therefore being out of range of the enemy. The other Tempestors just working their way around the back, so they're going to score it in there. Liberators in this quarter, and the Praetors score it in this quarter. Now I fire everything I've got, including, let's see, because the Long Strikes got killed as well. You can see up in the corner, because multiple things got over there into them, which is very sad. Because the Long Strikes were up there a minute ago, weren't they? Yeah, look, there you go. So they died as well. So, I've started blasting with everything that's still alive. All my dragon attacks targeted onto one of the Gargants. It was this one here, which is the Gatebreaker. I didn't get that many wounds on it though, from my shooting. And I thought, you know what, if I charge in there with my dragons, I'm not going to have my bodyguard save because they're not close enough, because they're slow. And that's going to be a bit risky, because if I don't kill it, and then it does that 50-50 4d6 mortal wounds attack on the Stardrake that could easily kill it. So I decided not to charge and just hope to get the double turn and then try and finish it off then, because I've already whittled it down heavily, and the Kraken Eater is now really far away from any of my stuff that's worried about it. So I do score in that round, because I've pulled the enemy away from the objectives by putting things in the backfield, as it were. So I do get the double now. So surround and destroy, which is going to be easy enough. I throw both the dragons into the Gatebreaker and murderalize it. There's some wounds gone on King Brod as well. You can see Celestial Blades. Crondis has put that on himself. One of the bodyguards is down, but still hanging in there. I want my 2 dragons fighting the same thing, ideally, because then Crondis can point at the unit and say, hey you, -1 attack. And you can see the Tempesters, they did some shooting, I think, into the Kraken Eater. And they were satisfying the conditions of surround and destroy, so were the Liberators and the Tempesters up there who were shooting at King Brod. So, presumably King Brod wants to eat my dragons, but there are only 3 enemy units left now. So once you start killing Mega Gargants, they really struggle for numbers. So let's see what they've got in store. So, another big score there. King Brod steps onto the objective and then makes a charge. Now, what he would like to do is probably not fight both of these, because that's quite scary. So if he could pile in outside of the attack range of one of them, that would be ideal. And in fact, look at that. So because it's King Brod's Stomp, the way you can do that quite handily is to do the monstrous action where you do a 3d6 leap and just end up on the other side away from Crondis, so you don't have to fight him. So you're fighting the Stardrake though. Now, he's in range of the bodyguard, but I don't think puts any attacks into them. Or maybe puts a small number of attacks into them. But because he's -1 to wound in combat against the Stardrake, and doesn't have that many attacks. And I don't know whether he had the -1 to hit debuff on him this turn, I don't think so. The Kraken Eater seems to be chasing down the Tempesters, but hasn't made it to them. So, 3 enemy units. I've still got almost everything left of note. Don't have the long strikes, but I can't stop my opponent scoring. Look at that. They've just got so many bodies and worth so much more on the objectives than I am. So, my opponent gets the double though. Intimidate the invaders, nice and easy one. And the Kraken Eater is coming in as well now, so they're going to hope to kill the Stardrake this turn. The Mini Gargant actually moves out of combat, I think. And Stardrake is accumulating wounds, but survives. Yeah, so it doesn't get killed. I don't kill Brod, but my opponent is just scoring steadily because they're worth so much more on the objectives than me. And now the Stardrake's dead. So we're into my turn now. So the Tempesters go after the Mini Gargant to try and kill it, to take this objective, but fail to kill it, which is very disappointing. But I did succeed with led into the Maelstrom, which I think I haven't added on there yet. Crondis goes after the Kraken Eater, Tempesters get onto the objective, because what I wanted to do was kill that, take this objective, kill that, take this objective. But they fail to kill either of them. So the Kraken Eater has taken a lot of wounds, but not quite enough to kill it. And the Mini Gargant has got 2 wounds left. So I'm not going to score big in this turn, only 2. So let's see. If I had scored 5 in this round, what would that have affected? Rather than 2. I don't know if it actually would have helped me win the game, you know, because King Brod is still alive. And he can get onto one of these objectives without dying and just take it off me and still score some points. I don't know actually, because Crondis is straddling the 2, so you'd probably have to get here and get there and kill Crondis, which is not that easy because he's only got 1 wound on him and he's got a ward save from the objectives as well. So I might have got some more out of it, but my opponent's going first in round 5 and is able to kill the Tempesters by throwing stuff at them and just sitting on the objectives in true Gargant fashion. I'm just worth more than you. You're not going to stop me scoring. And that's exactly what happens there. And my final turn, I'm going to be able to score a bit. And I do bring down the Kraken Eater in the end. So I took some nice cinematic, or attempts at cinematic shots of Krondys versus the Kraken Eater. And they do bring it down. So King Brod, I think, is the only enemy unit left. But you just can't stop them scoring. So it's a loss. Let me have a look at what the differential score was on the app here. So, against the Sons of Behemat, it was a 13-7 loss. So it was a close one, but I couldn't stop them scoring. And I wasn't helped by things like a really good unbind roll when I went for magical dominance. It was just overconfidence in the fact that I've got +4 to cast, really. So I could have found a way to secure that later on, probably. So that was a risk. And then failing to take the objectives in the late turns by leaving units alive with just a couple of wounds on them, not finishing them off in time. But that's what Gargants do best, sit on an objective and live. And they want a battle plan like this, where the objectives are few and close together. So they can just bunch up, sit on all of them, and by the time you kill them, it's too late for you to score. On to the next game. So, round 4 is the Frigid Zephyr. And the way this one works is that there is a ferocious squall in effect, which means that until a certain point in the game, which is determined by a dice roll as you go on, then units cannot fly and you can't see each other more than 12 inches away. So, the long strikes probably aren't going to want to come down onto the table until the squall is gone, unless there's really dire need. My dragons won't be able to fly. So let's see what we're up against. I've got the usual setup of units on the table and off the table. And we're up against the Ogre Moor Tribe's Meat Fist. And there is a Frostlord on Stonehorn with an Arcane Tome. And he is there. So, the Frostlord has the ability to do the leap as a monstrous action after charging, the 3d6 move. But it was ruled at this event that that is considered a fly move, so you can't do it while the squall is in effect. Which is the same way it was ruled at this venue last time I played against the Ogres on this scenario as well. So it's consistency. I don't know if there's been an official FAQ on that, on whether it counts as a fly move, because it says moves as if it flies, or it's worded some way like that. So it seems to be a flying move, so therefore the squall disallows it, and that's how it's ruled. So that's going to be out until the squall's gone, but of course I've got more flying models. You can see the Ogres have been spread out here to prevent any annoyance landing behind them and getting to the juicy heroes at the back. There's the pot. There is an Icebrow Hunter, who I don't think is on the table. I think he can drop down later. There is a Butcher, who is over there, with Hoarfrost. There is a Tyrant, which is there. A Tyrant's pretty tasty, and has killer reputation, the Fang of Gur, and Brawler Guts and Death Cheater abilities. So stuff stacked up on the Tyrant, who is the general. For Battle Line, there are 4 Iron Guts, which I think are there. Or it could be these ones, actually. Oh, actually, which ones are the... There's 2 units of 4 Iron Guts and 1 unit of 6 Gluttons. So that looks like Iron Guts. That looks like Iron Guts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So those are the Gluttons there. So those are your basic Ogres, the Gluttons. And the Iron Guts are the harder hitting ones, which are the 2 units of 4 there. Then there are 2 Frost Sabres who are hanging out off the table with the Hunter, ready to come in. And 4 Mournfang. So they're going to be scary. And what I was made aware of with the Mournfang is that if you unleash hell against them, you only ever hit on a 6, which is quite horrible, because I've got some decent unleash hell ability in this list. We've got, I'm not sure how I should be pronouncing it, but we've got Kahi. Would that be anywhere near it? Or Ka? Anyway, The tournament went well, and a smiley face, so that's nice. Okay, so I'm going to assume it was my first attempt at the pronunciation that is correct. And what else have we got in here? So this ogre list has the battle regiment and the command entourage, so I'm going to be able to force them to go first again, which is nice, and this is a real change in the way I normally play Stormcast, because I usually end up with 11 drops or 10 drops, which means I never get the choice of going first or second. So 2 drops. I'm enjoying it, making my opponent go first. It's refreshing. Now, obviously the ogres know what Stormcast are all about. They know I want to be precision striking down and taking down the succulent, juicy, tender morsels that are lurking somewhere at the back, and they're shielding the heroes from that. And my opponent was making sure to measure that there was more than 3 inches between the screens and the stuff that he didn't want to be shot. Because that means that when I drop down the likes of Tempesters 9 inches away, I can't then shoot at the heroes behind the screens. So, good strategy. And that dice on the Frostlord on Stonehorn, I think, is Mystic Shield. I think that's what that represents. So, they're coming for the Stardrake. Cinematic blurry shots, including a human hand. And yeah, there we go. So 5 points, and onto my turn. So, Magical Dominance. Let's do some Magical Dominance and get into the fight. So, I'm going to try and murder this unit of Ogre Gluttons. I'm also going to position my Knight Incanter to threaten something, because I can't get to any of the juicy stuff because there's not enough space for me to land anywhere because the ogres are well positioned and screened out. So, Stardrake straight into the Gluttons, murders a load of them. Frondis goes onto the objective. The Knight Incanter is threatening the Mournfang, so if I get the double turn, they're going to get blizzarded. And yeah, Stardrake doing quite well in combat there. And only 3 points though, because I can't take the objectives off the ogres, because every faction, it seems, apart from Stormcast, have ways of being worth 1 billion points on objectives. So it's been quite difficult to score the basic mission scoring. Primary objectives, if you will. I do not get the double either, so my opponent is going next. So I put Finest Hour on the Stardrake, because the Stardrake is kind of blocking up this whole area here. So if you want to get through, you're going to have to fight the Stardrake. I redeploy the Knight Incanter away from the Mournfang, because it gives her a chance to maybe not get charged, and maybe get another chance to do that Blizzard, which would be great. And she did move away, I think, 6 inches, so she's got a chance. The Frostlord runs away from the Stardrake area. Doesn't want to fight it. The enemy just completely abandon the middle and go for the other objectives instead. Just ignore the Stardrake. It's got Finest Hour and it's really tough to kill, so just don't fight it and move away. Could be a good strategy. And the Hunter and the Cats drop down on this objective and take that one. And the Knight Incanter takes a bit of shooting damage. Up at the top there, let's see. I think those units were going after the Tempesters that I brought down in this area here, who had shot... Let me go back and show you. So, the Tempesters had shot some of this unit off here. But they all get killed, well, both of them get killed by this mob. And the Mournfang do make the charge into the Knight Incanter, unfortunately. I think they get a plus on their charge when this guy's nearby. And they killed her with impact hits, so they then pile in towards the Liberators, but only one of them actually gets into combat, so they don't do much yet. And that's how it stands going into my turn too. So Intimidate the Invaders, nice easy one, just not be in my territory. And I bring my Tempesters, the other Tempesters, over onto this objective. I think I just drop them down here to take this off the enemy. And Frondis steams in up there and murders this unit here, which is nice. Oh, mostly murders. There might be one left actually there. And the Stardrake kills off the unit that had run away from it in the previous turn. And the Liberators just walk out of combat because they don't want to fight the Mournfang, really. And then, so this guy chose to do his Activate Twice or Fight Twice ability. and then got a second pile in, and was then able to pile in and put a toe on the objective, and therefore take it back, which is a hilarious move, which I didn't ponder. And you can see there's actually a little piece of card or something there that says, I don't know if it actually says fight twice, but it's something along those lines. So had I spotted that, it's something I maybe would have considered when positioning Krondys to stop him being able to pile in twice onto the objective. I don't know whether it's actually possible to do so, to stop that with the positioning of the other models that were in the unit, because if I'd come too far down here it could have piled in that way and got onto it. But because that little token there was behind the building, it wasn't in my mind that it could pile in twice. So I just wasn't factoring that in at all. So he does get to drop a toe in there, despite being almost dead. So I don't get that objective, which means it's going to cost me some points now. So look at that. Falling behind on the scores, so it's not looking too promising, but I do get the battle tactic. My opponent gets first crack in the third round. And you can see that I've put a mighty fist there, and I think that's showing that it's one of the ogre battle tactics, because they're one of the factions that have some seemingly easy ones, like be in combat or not be in combat or that kind of thing. So I think that's showing that they want to be fighting, or they want to kill a specific unit, or they want to kill something near an objective. So I put Finest Hour on Krondys because he's got loads of nasty stuff looking at him, including this Tyrant. And yes, okay, so what I was showing with that Angry Fist is that every ogre unit for the battle tactic has to be in combat at the start of the combat phase. So everything apart from the cats, because they're not ogres. So everyone's going to try and charge something. The Frost Lord is going to try and charge the long strikes. The Mournfang are going to charge the Liberators, and they do so. However, the Frost Lord kills the long strikes with its impact hits, meaning that the ogres fail the battle tactic, because the Frost Lord is not in combat at the start of the combat phase, because the impact hits happen in the charge phase. So hilariously, the ogres failed the battle tactic because they were too good at killing. The Mournfang and the Liberators continue fighting, and everyone else made their charges into Krondys that tried, including the Hunter. And they're racking up wounds on him, you can see, but he's hanging in there, and he kills the Hunter. And yeah, so we're still hanging on. All out defense on Finest Hour, keeping him alive for now. Is he going to survive any longer? Liberators and Mournfang hacking away at each other. Krondys on a single wound. The Tyrant is still up there as well. And he's died. Well, he went down swinging. Managed to take out plenty of ogres with him, but he's dead. So, it's not the worst position in the world to be in though, because my opponent failed the battle tactic and the Frost Lord is now miles away. So, can I secure some points while he's all the way over there? Let's find out. So, the Liberators do get killed as well, which means I then have to bring them back to life. So I go for Secure the Battlefield, which is a nice easy one, 6 inches away from the enemy in each table quarter. So the Tempesters are just going to stay there and shoot at people. The Vanquishers, the Praetors, are in this section here. That's a table quarter. The Liberators are in this one, and the Stardrake's in this one. So a nice easy one, and we're mostly going to be shooting and positioning for next turn. And I do manage to kill off some units with the shooting as well, do some good damage. The Tyrant's taken more wounds. So 5 points. And look at that. So we've both dropped 4 points now. So that's brought it back level after that disastrous turn for the ogres there. So I do get the next turn as well. So even though this unit is battle line, and killing them is required for my grand strategy, I don't think charging into them would have been wise with the Tempesters. I think they would have died. They can fight twice as well, so I decided to try and finish off the Tyrant instead. Stardrake goes after the Mournfang, trying to kill them. My opponent's grand strategy is to have more units in my territory than I do, so I just want to kill things. So that's harder to achieve. A couple of blurry photos here, I don't know why, but I did lead into the Maelstrom in that turn, so I charged in a battle line unit and a hero, and at least one of them was still in combat at the end, but they just about failed to kill what they were fighting, just. But I did score 5. So my opponent in round 4 is now up against it, and bait the trap. So retreat 2 units out of combat, charge 2 different units into combat. So this is easily failable, the way I'm looking at it here. It's a risk, but desperate times call for desperate measures. So the Tyrant can retreat and charge, but obviously it has to be 2 different units that successfully charge for the battle tactic. So the Tyrant can retreat and then charge in. So that's the retreat section of it satisfied for 1 unit. This unit here can charge. The Mournfang can retreat, and the Frostlord can charge. So if all those fail, or all those succeed their charges, but obviously the Liberators are quite far away because they have to be outside of 9 to stop me redeploying. They do make it in on the Liberators. The Frostlord into the Stardrake, does it make it with a 9-inch charge as well? No. So the Frostlord fails the charge into the Stardrake, which means it's another failed battle tactic, but my opponent does, I believe, pick up the middle objective and this one, because that hero is worth more than the 2 Dracoths, I think. I think he's worth 5, the Tyrant. So, points for the objectives, another dropped battle tactic, so I'm now in the lead. But the issue I have is that it's going to be very difficult for me to get my grand strategy, I think, and to deny the enemy's grand strategy, because they've got more units than me and they're heading towards my territory. And if I kill the units they're heading towards my territory, that means I'm not killing this unit of battle line here. There are other units I think that are more pressing, like the Mournfang, which are already in my territory, I think. So let's see what I've got up my sleeve in round 5. So the Stardrake. Let's see. So I think my opponent actually goes first in round 5. I think I've just marked the dice wrong there. So I made the Stardrake an unbinder because my opponent was threatening to do some nasty spells. So the Frostlord is going to be able to go after the Stardrake, and everyone else just flees into my territory, ready for their grand strategy success. And the Tyrant goes after the Tempesters and kills one of them. So if I'd got the turn, it would have been, let's wind back a bit. I could have charged in and killed the Mournfang, sent the Tempesters after the battle line unit, maybe killed them and got my grand strategy, potentially, and denied the enemy one. So the Ogre's getting the turn's a big deal there, I think. And so my opponent does manage to score 5 for that round. I think it was another one of the Ogre battle tactics, which all seem very easy. Whenever someone playing a different faction has their book battle tactics out and they say, yes, I just need to be in combat with one of your units this turn to get my battle tactic, or I need to unload from a ship, or I need to not be in combat, or I need to be next to one of your units. They just seem very easy compared to the Stormcast ones, which are things like pick an enemy hero with a wounds characteristic of 10 or more with 0 wounds allocated to it, and kill it with a specific unit type and all this kind of nonsense. Or have Cities of Sigmar units on the table, and very difficult ones. So I understand why they gave the Stormcast that extra one, because they were really bad, the other ones. So going into my turn 5 for real this time. So I am trying to chase down and kill the enemy, and I can deny the grand strategy because I do kill this unit here, but I don't have anyone left to score on the objectives because I didn't get the first go at turn 5, so I couldn't take any of the objectives. So the Stardrake just had to deny the enemy grand strategy by killing a unit and being in my territory with the Mournfang. So I don't score any points in the last round, but I deny the enemy grand strategy, so that brings the loss closer. So you can see how the turn order, the turn priority, is quite a big deal in these really tight games, because that was a really close one. It was looking really bad until that moment when my opponent killed the long strikes with the impact hits and failed the battle tactic. It was looking really good at that moment, and then I was able to capitalise on that and get some big scoring turns, but then at the end it just slipped away again. It's a really tough list, these ogres, though. It's a lot of meat, and what I'm finding is that this Stormcast Eternals list struggles with enemies that are worth a lot on objectives. And I took some pictures of all the armies that were out on display during the lunchtime on day 2 for the best painted or coolest army award voting. Board control is tough with Stormcast Eternals, yes. You have more ways to do that if you bring teleporting units, like the Knight Zephyros jumping onto objectives that aren't occupied. You've got Vanguard Hunters and the Priests with translocation, but obviously I've got none of those in this list. So I'm relying on killing things, and it's not actually the killiest list in the world, this Stormcast list. The dragons do have good killing potential if you can get the spells off to debuff the enemy and buff up your own attacks and have triumphs, and you manage to use things like roars successfully, then they can be killy, and Tempestors and Long Strikes can do some good killing as well, but it's not the most killy list. I'm finding so far that it's actually more resilient than any other Stormcast list. With the Praetors guarding the Stardrake so far, it's been very tough to kill it. So the 2 big dragons, at least one of them survived every game so far, I think. So lots of pictures of my army, because I was trying to find the best possible one to use and put around on social media. Then, pictures of the other armies. So this is the big warg. Free Guild Joe, thanks for all the lovely tournament reports. I've just transferred my life savings via PayPal for your next tickets. Well, that is very kind of you, so thanks very much to Free Guild Joe. And I will be having accountants head over your way to check that it was your entire life savings, just to make sure. Make sure you've not got anything hidden under the mattress, for example. We'll need to look into that. But, yes, a lot more tournament reports coming. I'll tell you quickly now, actually, what's coming up, while I've still got some viewership on this video before everyone drops off right at the end. So, opening up my little notebook here with my tournament calendar in it. So, at the end of this month, there is a Dead Zone event, which is good because I don't get to go to many of those because I'm normally organising them, so that's going to be fun. And then in April, I've got 4 tournaments. I've got 2 Kings of War tournaments and 2 Old World tournaments, which are going to be very exciting, obviously, because Old World's back, baby. And then, in May, there is an Age of Sigmar event. So, not abandoning Age of Sigmar, don't worry. Whenever there's a tournament, I'm trying to actively sign up for it. Then, we've got another Old World event, I think, in June. And then another Age of Sigmar one in June as well. And then Kings of War in July. And in the middle of all that, in May, I am actually running a Dead Zone event and a Kings of War event. So if anyone's interested in either of those game systems and can get to Nottingham, then check out my Facebook group link in the description. I think there's some links in there, or just send me a message on there and I'll let you know what's going on with that. Those are in May. And then there's Kings of War in September. So those are all the ones I'm signed up to at the moment. So plenty of different game systems. And I'm always on the lookout for more. It's very convenient for me to get to any Nottingham-based events, so the TSN Arena is great for Age of Sigmar. And Old World as well now. So, here's the big warg, and very nicely painted. And what I said to my opponent about this army was that actually when I saw that it was big warg, I thought this is just going to be a weird mishmash of all the different orcs and it won't be that cohesive. But they've obviously all been painted as not necessarily as a batch, but all in the same theme, all intended to be the same army. And it looks very cool and cohesive. So very, very nice. And some nice basing there. And there are some lizards on a tray. They weren't really put out for display particularly, but I thought I'd get a sneaky picture anyway. And obviously lizards are always cool with their crazy rainbow colours. This is the massive ghoul army. Now, how many ghouls are there, would you say? Should I even attempt to count them? Let's do a rough estimate. So, got like, if we say each row is roughly 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So, there's probably not quite 100 ghouls there, but that is a lot of ghouls. So can you imagine Krondys surrounded by all of that, rolling 1 billion dice for the tail attacks? That would have made my weekend, I think. Yeah, that would be amazing. There's some other cool stuff in there as well. 20 is the new unit size, so just 2 reinforced ghoul units. Yeah, so that looks about right. 80 regular ghouls and then some heroes in the middle as well. Then we've got the Sons of Behemat, of course, which we've already seen in detail. Then we've got some Stormcast, and it looks like crossbow judicators, which aren't very fashionable. Judicators in general aren't very fashionable. And lots of Stormdrake Guard and Ionis Cryptborn, who is in at the moment. And in fact, at the end of this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about a list that I've been messing around with on the army building app that features Ionis. Even though I don't own him, I just wanted to theoretically put a list together and see how it would look. That's similar to the one I'm running now, but with him in there as well. So we'll talk about that in a bit. So very nice Stormcast army. Then we've got some Nurgle. And look at that. Very, very nice indeed. Very gribbly. Then more Stormcast with Ionis again, and Krondys, and a couple of Fulminators, and some other units. Very nice. Then Caradron Overlords. This is a very nice army. And the way I was describing this army, because I was in there at lunchtime and some of us were just discussing the various armies, the paint job on this army, if you're just walking through the room and all the armies are out on display, this one isn't going to grab you because it's not a ridiculous colour scheme, it's not over the top, it's not wild, it's not attention grabbing. But when you look at it close up, it may well be the closest thing that I've seen in a while to the kind of paintwork you would expect to see in the windows of a Games Workshop store, because it's so clean. Look at that. Very nice. Then we've got Marathi. Marathi and Gotrek. Now, I don't know if there's a song of Marathi and Gotrek sitting in a tree, but I don't remember them being friends, but apparently they are in this army. And that's quite an interesting combo. They're both very tough to kill, aren't they? Okay, on to the next round. This is the final round, and this is no reward without risk. So, this is actually going to be relevant to my army, because this is the one where when a wizard is killed, they explode. And the size of the explosion is dependent on how many wounds they have. So if Krondys gets himself killed, that is going to be an 18-inch range explosion doing D3 mortal wounds to every single unit. Right then. Okay, let's see if Krondys can explode during this game. I'm up against the Caradron Overlords, so that army I was just complimenting on the very clean paintwork. Let me pull up that list right now. Opening it up on the app here. So, this is a Barak Mornar list, which means that they can switch off commands being spent on a 5+, for the sub-faction. They have the grand strategy of Rule the Skies. So this is a really interesting one for this game. Keep the big boats alive, and kill all enemy flying behemoths. So normally, you probably don't face any. In an average list, you probably don't have one. At most one. In this one, obviously there's 2 to kill, so that's going to be quite tricky to pull off for the Caradrons here. The amendment is Arcanauts counting as 2 on objectives. There is an article, Settle the Grudges. Pick 1 unit plus 1 to wound for the whole army. So that's going to be tough for me. This would be great normally for my Stormcast armies, because I only ever have crummy stuff on the table at the start and all the good stuff is hiding in the sky, so you wouldn't be able to pick any of that. But for this one, because the Praetors need to be on the table with the unit they're bodyguarding at the start of the game so that they can bind to each other, I actually have to have my powerful units on at the start, so they can just pick Krondys or the Stardrake instantly to be +1 to wound against them for the entire game. So that's quite terrifying. Then we've got, let's see, there is a once per battle 3d6 charge available as well. So that's also quite scary. There is, getting onto units now, so let's have a look. Most of it is on the table, but it's just inside the boat, so it's off the table but also on the table, because you can target units that are in the boats, they're just considered to be in a garrison, so it's -1 to hit them and +1 to their save. So for the stuff you can actually see here, we've got a frigate, which is the small boat there, which has a heavy sky cannon, and this one is really good at charging things and unloading units into combat. The ironclad is larger, has a more spacious carrying capacity, and also has more firepower. It also has the last word, which means that after a charge, or after Unleash Hell, it can also fire again with its big gun. And I think I'm about to sneeze, so I should probably mute the microphone. So I can confirm it was 3 sneezes, in fact. So, Ironclad, very dangerous, Unleash Hell, and then after Unleash Hell, the big cannon can fire as well. So if you want to unleash hell with the unit that's inside the ironclad, then you can then also fire with the cannon afterwards, which is very scary. So inside the ironclad there are 15 Thunderers with the various weapon options. I think it's just 3 of each weapon. And there's also an Admiral and a Navigator. So the Admiral has various buffs floating around. Let me have a look here. So the Navigator is the one that reads the winds and can slow down your enemies, and yeah, that's the annoying bit. You can do mortal wounds to the enemy and make them half movement, which is quite annoying if you're a fast army like dragons. The Admiral, let's see what he has. So he once per turn issue a command to Grunstock units for free, so that would be the Thunderers. He's got a Grenade, which is once per battle 2+ turn off ward saves, which is terrifying for Krondys or the Stardrake, because it could just turn off their bodyguard. There is an Endrin Master with an Endrin harness as well, but he's in the frigate, along with the 2 units of the Balloon Boys, which are Endrin riggers. They can repair the boat, and then when they get out, they're pretty tasty in combat as well, because when they disembark out straight into combat, they can all strike first, which is nice. And anything else? Oh yeah, the Arcanauts company as well, which has the special weapons in it as well, which is down there. So just crummy little Arcanauts, but they're worth 2 on objectives in this army. So this is a really cool Kharadron Overlord's army, the kind of one I would like to be fielding eventually if I ever get around to painting my Ironclad. Because looking at it over in the cabinet now, I've got 30 Arcanauts, 3 Balloon Boys, a few different heroes, and 1 gun hauler. And the Ironclad is in a similar situation to the situation Krondys was in, where it's just sitting base coated on the shelf staring at me while I work on other projects. So maybe one day I'll get to that and actually get this army out on the table. That would be nice, wouldn't it? So there's my units in the sky. Now, in this game, I am not getting the choice of going first or second, because we're both 2 drops and I lose the roll. So I have to set up in such a way, because I still want that double turn. If I set up really far away from the enemy, out of range of the Navigator, for instance, for his ability to halve the movement, then maybe my opponent will just let me go first, because I'm so far away I'm not much of a threat. On the other hand, if they let me go first, what could happen? Well, I could drop down my Tempesters near them, and I could start blasting at the guys inside the ships. And I could maybe kill a load of Thunderers, and that really limits their output. I could drop down long strikes in the first turn and start blasting away at them as well. And I think that's a bit risky. Even in one turn, I could do a lot of damage to these crummy little dwarves that have no ward saves. So, with that in mind, I feel like my opponent... Well, I thought my opponent was going to give me the first turn regardless, because you don't want to get doubled by Stormcast. But I deployed up a bit. I didn't want to deploy too far back, because my opponent could then have less incentive to take the first turn. And I kind of want to tempt my opponent to give me or to take the first turn themselves. It doesn't often work, because there's usually very little reason for someone to do that. You really have to offer them something juicy for them to take the first turn against Stormcast, because they know I'm looking for a double. But this army, because they've got no ward saves and I've got a lot of shooting to drop down at the sky, I can really limit their output and get my spells up to buff my unit's defences with Mystic Shield and such, and maybe lower their output by casting spells at them to reduce the amount of attacks they have with their shooting with Krondys. So if I start doing all that, suddenly that first turn actually looks quite juicy for me. So it's not as straightforward as it usually is in this game. So I've bound the Praetors to Krondys for this game, because what I want to do is get Krondys into combat with the Ironclad while it's got 18 models inside it. Because that way, is it 18 or is it 17? 17 models. So with the Ironclad itself, I'm going to be rolling 18 tail attacks, if that's the way it's calculated, because they're all considered on the battlefield within 3 inches of Krondys, so that'd just be a load of attacks, and that would be very powerful indeed. So Krondys is the one I want to keep alive, so I've got the bodyguards on him, but my opponent does have the ability to switch off ward saves, so I've also got him on the objective, so if that's... Wait a minute. No. I had the right reasoning, but I gave you that information in the wrong order. So, the bodyguard right in front, because if I'm given the first turn I need to get up faster. So the reason he's on the objective is because the bodyguards are vulnerable to being attacked by the enemy first, because even if I put them behind, they can land ships behind me and shoot the bodyguard off first. So I've got him on the objective, so he would have a 6-up ward save in the situation of those guys dying first. However, the ward save objective or the bodyguards would be irrelevant if they managed to turn off my ward saves on a 2-up, which isn't a guarantee, but it's quite likely. Yes, bodyguard is a ward, so that is turned off by those rules. Now, because I've got bodyguards on Krondys, I Finest Hour the Stardrake in turn 1, because my opponent is choosing to go first, and I'm thinking, okay, you're going first, you're going big here, because you know I can get a double, so you're going to try and kill something. And are you going to gamble on that 2+ turning off my ward? Because if you don't get it, chance of you killing Krondys is drastically reduced. So you'd be much better off trying to kill the Stardrake, who does not have bodyguards, so landing behind me, blasting the Stardrake to smithereens, and go from there. Now, that's why I've put Finest Hour up. It's kind of a deterrent, because the Stardrake is going to be easier to kill because it doesn't have bodyguards. So, what is my opponent going to go for? What would you go for in this situation? Would you go for a Stardrake with Finest Hour, or would you go for Krondys, try and turn off the ward save, or kill the bodyguard, and then blast Krondys to death? Because Krondys is the one that has the million attacks against an Ironclad full of Thunderers. So he's the biggest threat, which is why I've got the bodyguards on him in the first place. Now, the Liberators take wounds from the Navigator, and they've also got half movement now, and so does the Stardrake, takes a wound as well. And the Praetors take some wounds from that as well, and my opponent has selected Krondys to be +1 to wound against for the entire game, which is very scary. Let's see. So you go for Krondys, thinking Ironclad and Thunderers can kill him without Finest Hour. Yep, and that's what happens. So Krondys is dead. Now, the ward save was turned off on a 2+ successfully. Now I think if I'd had bodyguards and Finest Hour on Krondys that my opponent could have easily dropped down and done the same thing to the Star Drake. And the Star Drake would have been dead instead. So looking back, maybe instead of splitting my defences each way, I should have dedicated more to Krondys, knowing that he was the one that can get 1 billion attacks if he gets into the Ironclad successfully. Which is no guarantee, because it does have a serious Unleash Hell. So Krondys is dead, all the Bodyguard are dead. So we actually had a funny situation here. So the Bodyguard were alive, and the big cannon had allocated some attacks. It allocated some of them to Krondys and some of them to the Bodyguard. I believe. This is the situation we're in. So, because the Bodyguard saves is after Krondys makes an armor save, but there are wounds that are waiting to be allocated and armor saves taken for the Bodyguard. So if you do Krondys' saves first, would you then pass those wounds on to the Bodyguard, potentially, even though they've got wounds waiting to be allocated to them? Or do you allocate the wounds on the Bodyguard first? Does the attacking player decide? Does the defending player decide? And it's a really weird, complicated situation, because you could finish off the Bodyguard with the shots that are waiting to be allocated to them, but they are also part of the ward save for another model that's had wounds allocated simultaneously, because it's all from the same weapon. So, very complicated situation. So we decided we'd get an official ruling on it, because this is something that may well come up again, so it's going to be good to know this for the future. And apparently, well, it's more complicated than that, actually. So Defender decides when it's different weapons targeting a unit, which saves to make first. Because there may be a situation where once you take damage from a certain type of weapon, you then have some kind of negative effect maybe to your save or something along those lines. So you would want to take saves from a specific weapon first, in which case the defender does decide. But it was ruled at this event that the attacker, if it's a single weapon targeting 2 units and you've got wounds to allocate to both, then the attacker decides which unit you resolve the attacks against first. However, the hilarious part was that after we figured out this very complicated situation and had multiple people come over and try to figure it out because it's so weird, my opponent then decided, oh, actually, I could just turn off your ward saves on a 2+ before we do all this nonsense, and then just roll the dice and turned off the ward save anyway. So that was easy, wasn't it? That was an easier way to solve this problem, just forget the ward save entirely. So everyone dies. So I'm down a Krondys and Praetors and 1 Liberator, and it's only turn 1 and they've not done anything yet. They've not moved. So, what is my plan now? What is my grand plan? Because I could get a double turn. My opponent went big for that turn 1 to kill Krondys and it worked. But that's also part of my plan as well, because I want the double turn. And I've got some some powerful shooting units in the sky. Now, one side effect of Krondys dying is that in this battle plan he explodes, and he does splash wounds to every single unit on the table, because they're all within range. So the Liberators... Now, annoyingly, the Arcanauts take damage. And I was going to have the Arcanauts as my Draconith Destruction unit that I was going to kill for that battle tactic. So that's now out the window. I was going to leave them alone until I want to kill them, so they were fully 10 models. So that's sad, because they lost some. The ships get wounded, though. And that leaves me thinking, the ships have taken wounds. Interesting. Now, what does this mean? Because I'm thinking, I want to try and bring down the Ironclad. What do I need in order to do that? Because my opponent's grand strategy for a start needs the boats to be alive, so I'm going to try and kill them anyway, but they're also carrying around the enemy, and they are important for battle tactics. Unloading models, loading in models are all part of battle tactics for the KO. So, I think the first one was kill one of my units, kill a specific unit with shooting, and that's why Krondys was then killed, I think. Or it may have been the Bodyguard that were chosen, actually, which is why I was eager to kill them as well. So, I want to bring down the Ironclad. What am I going to do to that end? I've got the Star Drake. If I charge in the Star Drake, the Unleash Hell will be devastating, so I'm going to bring down another unit and try and charge them in as well. So I've got Tempesters who can drop in over here, shoot it, then charge in. Star Drake, move up here, shoot it, then charge in. Long Strikes drop down, shoot it, and not charge in because they're not insane. So I'm hoping to do loads of wounds from shooting, and then charge in, and then kill it, and then that gets me into combat with the Thunderers, where obviously they don't thrive. And if I get the double turn, then that means they don't even get a turn of shooting either, before I can then start eating them. So that is my dream setup. I'm also going to have the Knight Incanter drop down up here, which means that if I do get the next turn, there's an option to mercilessly blizzard the frigate or whatever's left over here. So let's do it. So secure the battlefield. I'm going to have a unit in each table section 6 inches away from the enemy. So that's going to be the Knight Incanter, the Liberators, and I'm going to bring down some Tempesters here and shoot probably the Arcanauts and just leave them there and hope for the double when they can get involved again. And I will have the Long Strikes down here holding this section. So let's do it. Tempesters, murder a load of Arcanauts. Tempesters, do a lot of murdering to the Ironclad. And what's this? Some models have unloaded. Now, let's go back here. So, you may be wondering what's going on. Why are there some models outside the boat? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then some heroes as well, who it looks like haven't been put down yet. So, all my shooting just completely obliterates the Ironclad before I even have to charge it, which is the dream. Because now I don't have to deal with the last word, which is the after, at the end of the charge phase. Yep, so brought down the Ironclad. Now the Thunderers and the Heroes are on the ground, and I'm now going to be able to charge them. So I'm going to charge the Tempesters in first to eat the Unleash Hell, and then the Star Drake is going to go in as well. So that Tempester got killed, which is why it's in this corner. Got killed by the Unleash Hell, but manages to get into combat. I don't want to drag the Admiral in because he's quite good at fighting, so I'll just leave him out for now. And I mostly focus on trying to kill the Thunderers with the Star Drake. And the ones I try to eat are the Fumigators, because they're the ones that do mortal wounds at the end of combat. So I tried to eat those. I think I ate 2 of them successfully, and then did some good wounds to the rest of them as well. And those, I think that's the dead pile building up there. So we're in quite a healthy situation now, and I'd say in terms of kills it's pretty even. Because I've killed the Ironclad, which is worth about the same as Krondys, and I've also killed some Thunderers as well though, so it's actually looking pretty good. So if I get the double now, I'm going to finish off the Thunderers, definitely, and I'm also going to be able to try and do something to the frigate, maybe even a merciless blizzard. If my opponent goes next, then the Thunderer is going to be able to shoot, which is obviously scary, and the frigate is going to charge the Star Drake, no doubt. So, the Tempesters actually look pretty safe over there, because I think the Star Drake is the #1 priority to kill, so I think the frigate has to come in here and try and kill that, because if you get rid of both my dragons, everything else doesn't quite hit as hard. I think that's the key. But also, one thing to consider, the enemy objective control is now not that great, because if the frigate comes over here, you've got 3 Arcanauts on this entire section of the table where there are 4 objectives, and everything else around this one, whereas I've got units quite well spread out around the place, so I've got some good board control compared to the KO, which is weird, because that's something that they should be good at with going up in the sky. But the fact that they committed to being in this area here, where there is only 1 objective, means they've had to unload in this spot that's really far from all this scoring opportunity. So, I do get the double, and start devouring more of the Thunderers. Now, I think I've gone for Surround and Destroy, which is why the Tempester has retreated to this table edge. And eating the Thunderers. The Knight Incanter comes down, but I don't get any Primal dice. So Blizzard does not go off. And then you can see that the Tempesters managed to gun down the remaining Arcanauts. The Frigate actually redeployed away from them, because I definitely would have charged the Frigate to take away its bonus to charge. I don't think a Frigate with Unleash Hell and then fighting back, I don't know if that would have killed 2 Tempesters. But I would have liked to have shot it, ideally. Yeah, I don't know about being in combat particularly, because the guys inside are fairly good at fighting. So obviously I can all-out defense, but I would have liked to have just shot it and done some damage that way, or shot the guys inside as well. But it redeployed away out of their shooting range, so I just had to shoot the Arcanauts. The Liberators moved down to this edge for Surround and Destroy. And so I've got the Tempester, the Incanter, and the Liberators. Surround and Destroy accomplished. I think there's only 1 Thunderer left. And all those ones there are dead. That's a dead pile. And the Long Strikes, I think, put some shooting damage on. Possibly, yeah, they shoot down some of the Balloon Boys inside the Frigate. Rather than targeting the Frigate, which I'm not going to kill in one go, I decided to target the guys in it for now. Because they're quite scary as well, and they can unload and fight first and all that stuff. So instead of just plinking a couple of wounds onto the boat, which they'll then just repair, I gun down the guys inside instead. So, successful 2 turns there. And it's looking like an uphill struggle for the Caradrons. So the Frigate moves around this side. So the reason it's done this, let's have a look. If the Frigate moves here to charge the Stardrake, that allows the Tempesters to redeploy onto this objective, which is the only one the KO currently hold. So they don't want to give that up. So if you move here, you allow the Tempesters to redeploy onto it. So you have to go around this way, and then make the slightly longer charge, I think, into the Stardrake from up here. And it does have a once per game 3d6 charge move to use, don't forget. The heroes are spreading out a bit. And let's see if it makes that charge. Oh, you can see I think the Knight Incanter gets killed. I think she gets shot by some of the heroes and the Frigate. And then the Frigate lands there, where that little base cutout is, just to show where everything is. It's a nice easy way to put it in there when the model is going to be awkward to place. The Balloon Boys pile out, some of them towards the Tempester, some of them towards the Stardrake, and the Endrin Master as well is down there, and they're all going to strike first. So they're racking up wounds on the Stardrake. If they can kill the Stardrake now, then it looks close, but they still have the issue of board control, because everything is in this corner. If the Stardrake lives, though, then they're held up for another turn, and it looks really bad for the KO. So let's see if they can start racking up wounds on him. They can, but they don't kill him, and then he's able to eat some of the Balloon Boys, and stomps on some of the others, and it's looking pretty good. And my opponent only scores 1 point, because the battle tactic required, I believe, killing the Stardrake. And I think I'm going to sneeze again. Okay, only a single sneeze there. So failing to kill the Stardrake, which was the battle tactic requirement, and being so far away from all the objectives and only holding one of them, scoring 1 point, this is not looking good at all for the KO. Even if they get the next turn, they're still up against it now. So they really needed to kill the Stardrake and then get the next turn and then start mincing my other units. But I get the next turn. So nice, easy, intimidate the invaders. And what's this? The Stardrake kills the Frigate and everyone else who was surrounding him. I think he stomped on the Endrin Master to finish him off, which is great. The Tempester there died, I think, previously. But the Long Strikes were shooting up the Frigate as well. The Tempesters came over, started shooting the Frigate, and took the final objective that the KO held. So, yeah, it's not a good time to be the KO right now. They've only got, is that 5 models left? And they're up against an almost dead Stardrake and some powerful shooting units. So another 5 points for me, and it is basically over now. But my opponent is still going to try, get a nice, easy, intimidate the invaders, because they're already out of territory. They can't physically make it back. So they're going to try and kill the Stardrake in this turn. And they do. with their combined shooting power. And the Admiral is the one that finished off the Star Drake, so if I want a reprisal battle tactic, I have to kill him. And so there was 2 points there for a battle tactic, but no objectives, because look where they are. They're all stuck in this corner. And they do get the double, though, going into turn 4. So the balloon boys get in there, shoot down 2 of the long strikes. And you can see that the navigator has halved the movement of these 2 units as well, which is what the black dice is representing. But only 1 point, because there was no battle tactic they could really... Wait a minute. Let's go back. So I think, yeah, was it turn 3? Yeah, Intimidate the Invaders was turn 3, and then there was no battle tactic they could really do in turn 4. So they were able to take this objective, which gets the 1 point. So there we go. Now into my turn. I managed to rally back one of the long strikes, which is great, and then everyone comes in, just starts shooting, starts blasting away. I only get 3 points though, because there's no real battle tactics I can do from this position, sadly. I'm running a bit low. And then, going into turn 5, my opponent gets to go first, and has led into the Maelstrom as an option. So there is this battle line unit, who I need to kill for my grand strategy, by the way. So them and one of the heroes can charge in, and one of them still be in combat at the end. One of the long strikes gets shot again. And so does one of the Tempesters. But the final Tempester, the Endrin Master, charges in, and I unleash Hell, and that kills the Endrin Master. Which is nice. So then the Admiral and the Endrin Riggers get into the Tempester and kill the Endrin Riggers, but the Admiral's still in combat at the end, so battle tactics successful, but I think that's the only model left on the KO. So I shoot with the long strike and the Tempester, then the long strike actually charges in because I need to kill that Admiral for the reprisal battle tactic. Armour gone. Hi Andy, finally got to see one video live. Yeah, this is a slightly unusual time for my live streams. I usually do them immediately after the tournament, but when I got home and I was setting up, I thought, wait a minute, is that a live Stormkeep stream going on at the same time? That's going to siphon off some of my valuable Stormcast Eternals audience. So I won't do it tonight. I'll wait until Monday evening instead. So some people may be catching this that don't normally get to tune in live, so that's nice. So the Admiral is killed in combat. I didn't need to hit him with the long strike champion. The Tempester and the Mount finished him off first. So what a bloodbath. There are only 6 models left on the table. And I do get my grand strategy for killing the enemy battle line and having some of mine still alive. And after that massive first turn for the KO, where they really went big, killed Krondys, killed the Praetors, and then after that it was just downhill horribly, because I got those 2 massive turns where I killed the Ironclad and then killed pretty much all the Thunderers. Then the frigate came in and failed to kill the Stardrake, which is represented by the 1 point turn there. And then I then killed the frigate, and then my opponent was just scratching and struggling. So really, if we look at this setup, my opponent was mostly fighting here for the game, and there's only 1 objective there. Now, I agree with trying to kill one of my big dragons immediately. I think that was a good ploy and it worked. However, they were miles away from the objectives. So I think if they were able to set up somewhere here around all the objectives a bit more, so they could have held on to them for longer and scored more points deeper into the game, I think that would have helped the KO in the long run. Rather than, if we go back a bit to a bit of a wider shot, yeah, all their stuff was pretty much focused here for the entire game. And miles away from the objectives, never really had any board control for the course of the game. And I did have board control from quite early, because I was able to bring down units in different positions and draw the enemy back towards the Knight Incanter. Had the Tempesters drop down over here that no one could be designated to go and deal with. So yeah, obviously the KO, if they don't get doubled, It could have been a totally different story because those Thunderers would have been able to actually shoot before they were all wiped out. But as it was, quite a nice victory for the Stormcast. And let's have a look at what the differential score was on the tournament page here. Just pulling it up now. Let's see. Round 5. It was a 17-3 win in differential, and you can see why with this victory point margin that I was able to accumulate here. The only turn I dropped points was when I just didn't have battle tactics to score because it was too early to try reprisal because the Admiral was too far away and I just ran out. So, what does this army struggle with? I would say this army struggles with battle tactics a little bit. That was an issue in some of the games, but it also excelled in other battle tactics, so kind of balances out. It was more difficult than usual for me to, or more complicated for me to score the likes of Surround and Destroy because I have less disposable units in this army that can just camp out on the edges and not care if they're accomplishing anything. And Tempesters are alright for that, but it depends where the enemy are. You're kind of taking them out of the game if you put them out there, and then they have to come back towards the action, so it depends on the layout. But the big dragons, obviously, ideally you don't want them doing that job. And the main issue, though, was that I just didn't have the bodies on objectives to be scoring. So primary objectives is where I was let down most. Most of my opponents had some way of being worth more on objectives, like the Mega Gargants were obviously worth a ton, and if you can't kill them fast enough, you're just going to lose based on that alone. The Ogres, I had that problem as well, even though that was a super close game. That was the main struggle in that game, though, taking the objectives. And I didn't face anything that had just billions of units, billions of models, like the Ghoul list at this event, for example, which Krondys would have been amazing against at fighting. But I would have struggled if they were all spread out on different objectives to actually clear them all out, probably. Because they're just worth so much more than me. So it's a list that's a work in progress. Now, I do not have Ionis Cryptborn, but I will talk a little bit about this list I've been tinkering with on the Age of Sigmar app, just because I think it would be fun. So, the Stardrake, the Lord Celestant on the Stardrake, more specifically. The reason I wanted him for this list is the extra armour he has over the Drakesworn Templar, and I knew he was going to be doing most of the fighting. So, I wanted the extra +1 to the save that he has, for 100 points. If I was taking a list with 3 big dragons, then what I'd be looking at, if I were to get Ionis Cryptborn, would be Krondys, the Drakesworn Templar as the general, with Master of the Celestial Menagerie, and then Ionis. So Ionis and Krondys would be doing their tricks, their magic and their prayers, and then doing a lot of the fighting, because they have a lot of ways to debuff the enemy, those two. So they're going to be quite survivable when they get in there. And then the Drakesworn Templar would be used more for support, and being alive to therefore grant the other guys the -1 to wound against them in combat. And then the Templar would more be used to go after like chaff units and then ranged support. Then also in that list, you can still fit a Knight Incanter. And then for the battle line, you can have a couple of Liberator units and maybe 1 unit of Tempesters. Now, you can wrangle with the list a bit to get some Bodyguard in there as well, some Praetors. I think it's possible to afford 2 units of Praetors, 1 for Ionis and 1 for Krondys, since they're going to do most of the fighting, but that also means that you're then struggling to get them all where you want, because you've only got the 1 source of teleport. So maybe you'd want a unit of 6 or a unit of 3 on just one of the dragons. So it's interesting anyway, and I was talking to one of the other players at the event as well who had Ionis in his list. And he was interested in the idea of taking a list with a load of dragons and Celestial Menagerie to give them give the enemy -1 to wound in combat against them. So I think 3 big dragons is the limit that you can probably afford. And I think it would be fun. I don't know if I'm actually going to buy Ionis Cryptborn though, because I've got such a massive painting queue already. I just think that's a fun thing to think about. It'd be an interesting combo. This list that I was playing here did lack some damage output in certain circumstances. It struggled to get through the Mega Gargants a bit with just massive amounts of wounds. It seemed to excel in damage output in this last game against the KO, but they had no ward saves at all, so that definitely helped. And I've got good rend in this list. Good rend and also Krondus' spell, which obviously didn't come up in this game because he was dead immediately. But decent rend on my shooting, apart from the crossbows, but they've got a lot of shots, and if they're targeting guys in the ships that don't have very good armour, then that's still decent. But I've got good mortal wound shooting and good rend on the Stardrake and the long strikes as well. So that's good against an army with no ward saves like the Caradron Overlords. So I think that worked out quite well. But damage output is still a bit low because the dragons aren't super efficient at dealing damage. I've found them very survivable. I think this last game is the only one where both of them died and I still won the game. So that was good. Armagon says, get him, Ionis is very, very fun. I've played him a lot in Skywing, and apart from the difficulty of that army, Ionis always delivered. He certainly is fun looking at his rules. And in fact, I'm going to pull up his scroll now. Because apparently his ability that... Is it a prayer? Let's see. I think it's a prayer that puts -1 attack onto the enemy, isn't it? Or is it just an ability he has? No, it's at the start of... Let's see. Having a look here. He has an ability to put -1. At the start of the combat phase, pick an enemy unit and subtract 1 from the attack characteristic of that unit's melee weapons. Yes, so that does stack with Krondus or Karazai, who can do the same thing. But those Krondus and Karazai don't stack with each other apparently, but they can stack with Ionis. So that would be great against certain units that have like 3 or 4 attacks each. That would be really good, obviously, if you're sending them into the same combat. And then if you've got a -1 to wound for having a Drakesworn Templar, for example, -1 to wound against them in combat, it's going to make them much more survivable. So that would be great. Yeah, Ionis has a lot of crazy rules. I will agree with you on that. He does look like a lot of fun. So I'll put him on the list anyway, so I might get him eventually, but it might take me 3 years to actually get him bought and painted with the amount of stuff I'm working on already. So we shall see. I do keep on various wargame retailer websites, I do keep a basket open with various things that I might buy in the future. So he is in there. And I'm sure that annoys the retailers because they probably get stats on how many people put things in the basket and how often that converts to a sale. But that's where I just keep my shopping list for the future, basically. So occasionally I'll get email updates from some retailers to say, hey, you have stuff in your basket, did you forget to buy it? It's like, no, I'm just using it as a shopping list, leave me alone. Right, I think it's time to wrap up this video. I found this list a lot of fun to play with. It was very, very different from my usual Stormcast, which is Annihilators dropping down from the sky, killing things and dying. This is very, very different. No teleporting, and my units were actually able to survive against strong enemies as well, which was very new. I do have more Praetors I can paint because I got 2 Dominion boxes. So I could paint another unit of those and maybe have 6 defending a dragon or 3 on each. That would be cool. Let's see, dragon lists, they are very expensive, yes. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the new edition with dragons. Because obviously there's going to be a load of new models that come out. So whether that's going to invalidate or make any of the old ones less desirable, only time will tell. I hope not, though. I did hear people saying that because the Stardrake's really old, then maybe they'll discontinue that and get rid of its War Scroll. That would be terrible. Obviously, I could just put it on a different base and use it as Karazai or something. Don't think there would be any issue doing that, really. Hopefully, they just give new models for some of the older units that are a bit not very exciting, a bit boring. Liberators, for example, maybe the Dracoths that are not the most dynamic poses, even though I already have 6 of them. If they brought out new models, that means they're giving them attention, so I wouldn't be opposed to getting more. But the main thing is, I think Stormcast just have too many War Scrolls, so if they can't really add more units, surely. We've got 1 billion of them. Isn't there about 80 Stormcast War Scrolls? It's too many. They could easily combine some of them. There's no reason that Liberators and Sequitors, in my opinion, have to exist. You could just keep one of them, and then people who have the models for one can use them as the other. Don't see why they need both. There are... let's see. What else is pointless? Loads of the foot heroes are terrible. If they got rid of them, then people could just use the models as different ones. So that wouldn't be too much of an issue. They don't need that many heroes to exist, and they obviously, GW don't care about them, because even though they balance certain units, balancing for example, the Knight Heraldor, who I'm sure no one takes because he's terrible, is not on their priority list, because otherwise he would have been totally changed during the various updates. I like Draco the Ingar, but if you have more than 4, they look pretty boring. Yes, they do. If you have lots of them, because there's only 2 different poses, and that's only a slight variation in the pose with the feet. So yeah, they can look boring. So I would like them to have a more dynamic model. So if I was going to add even more than 6, then I could get the fancy new ones to throw in. New War Scrolls for limited edition models. Yeah, there are some limited edition models that don't have rules anymore. I can't name any of them off the top of my head, but I can visualize them. So I know the ones you mean. So, while that would be nice, I think really those models should just be used to represent other units that do have scrolls. I think that would make more sense. So, what else could they fold together? It's tough, but I think something like Retributors, even though I really like them, they obviously don't care about those old paladins. So if they were to discontinue those, they could easily become Grand Hammer Annihilators in someone's list. Models that you couldn't just use as something else. I can't think of any off the top of my head. If they discontinued them, you'd struggle to find a use for them. Maybe Prosecutors if they disappeared. Maybe they could do new Prosecutor sculpts that have kind of more feathery wings rather than the spiky wings that the old ones have. Yeah, the spiky wings aren't really in fashion anymore. I'm looking at Celestant Prime and the Knight Azeros with the spiky wings. The newer flying stuff like Yndrasta, much more stylish wings. I would agree that 50% of the heroes can be canned. Some of them can be combined, sort of, because they're so similar. You don't need, for example, the 2... what's the guy called with the totem and the other one's got the flag? Vexillor. You don't need 2 of those because one of them's garbage. So just say, this is a Knight Vexillor. Doesn't matter if you've got a totem or a flag, it's the same rules. Simple. There are loads of them where you could do something like that. And the Knight Heraldor, for example, you could just use him as a Knight Vexillor with the totem, because it's a similar kind of effect they were supposed to have in the game anyway. It's like a mortal wound attack. So would anyone really complain if they discontinued the Knight Heraldor and you turned up with this guy with a trumpet and said this is a Knight Vexillor? I certainly wouldn't complain. So yes, 2 hours 23 minutes this tournament report, which has now gone into complaining about Stormcast Eternals' vast amount of war scrolls and useless units. Time to wrap the video up. Let's see. Hope Yndrasta becomes the monster hunter she is and not the pseudo-inspiring character that has nothing to do with the lore. Yes, that's very weird. Yndrasta has some good rules, but there are a lot of rules that probably shouldn't all be on the same model. And she lacks the rules that would give her the flavour that they seem to have originally intended, so I would agree with that. So hopefully she gets something new, because it's a really nice model, and I think I've painted her quite well also, but I've never used her in a tournament because she doesn't really fit. I would say with any kind of list. Could you build a list that Yndrasta is good and if more efficient than anything else in? I don't know. Because the kind of units that she supports by bringing them back to life are generally the ones that don't survive very long anyway, and therefore it wouldn't really help them. So it's very strange. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. We've had some quite good viewership on this video, which is nice. So I might ponder doing more live streams at this time of day if people are actually going to tune in, which is nice. And don't forget to check out all the links in the description, including the Facebook groups and Discord server, where I post all my stuff in there. The Stormcast Eternals stuff I do post as well in the Stormkeep Discord. So if I've got a list I want to suggest to get feedback on, I usually post it in there. So that's a good place for Stormcast Eternals content. And their YouTube is very useful as well for Stormcast players. I tend to watch all their streams and take some tips away. Usually their tips will involve throwing my entire model collection away and replacing it with models I don't have. So I don't follow all their tips, but I do take something from it, even if you can't necessarily replicate the lists they come up with entirely because of your own model collection. Then you can look at why a list works and try and replicate that somewhat within the confines of your own collection, which is what I like to do. And with that, I think, apart from telling you to like the video and subscribe, obviously, if you haven't for some reason, and obviously donate all your life savings via the links down there as well, so that I can attend endless tournaments and keep reporting on them for years and years and years, and spreading the light not only of the Stormcast, but any other army I might decide to take to an event as well. Keep shining that beacon, illuminating the tactical darkness that you might be dwelling in, just waiting to be enlightened and guided to a more glorious and... What am I saying? I didn't even win that many games at this event, did I? So yeah, I like to think that there's some tactical insight here, even if I don't win all my games. I'm sure you agree with that. Yeah, I think I can educate people. I'm sure school teachers, like a school English teacher isn't necessarily going to be an award-winning author, but they can teach you to become one. How about that? Let's go with that. Okay, time to wrap this up. All that remains to be said is... good night out there. Whatever you are.